While my husband, Jake, was out, I went into his room and started looking through his things. I found several receipts in his drawer, and when I checked them, I saw that they were for brown bags. I had never received brown bags as gifts from Jake, and when I looked around the room, I couldn't find any women's bags. So I figured he must have bought them for someone else, maybe his lover. I can't believe he used our shared credit card to buy gifts for her. If he's using our credit card, doesn't that mean he's using my money too? I never thought Jake could be this terrible. My name is Lily, and I'm a 40-year-old office worker. I work at a well-known clothing company, so I'm paid well. After working hard all my life, I've reached a high position in my department. I really enjoy my job and hope to keep it until I retire. Even though I'm a workaholic and busy all the time, I have a family. I've been married to Jake for 10 years, and our son, Max, is 10 years old, the same age as our marriage. We all live happily together, but I do have some worries. My biggest worry is that Jake doesn't work much. I met Jake through work. At the time, I was working for a brand that appeared in a fashion magazine, and Jake was a fashion model. He was very good-looking and had a bright presence, which helped him land many modeling jobs. When we talked, we found we liked the same music and TV shows, and we instantly clicked. We started going out for dinner together, and that's how our relationship began. After 2 years of dating, I found out I was pregnant with our child, and we got married. It wasn't planned, but we were close as a couple, so it didn't feel forced. After Max was born, we were happy in our own way. But Jake's modeling career dropped sharply. Once he turned 25, the job offers slowed down, and by his late 20s, they stopped completely. I still had a stable job at a big company, so money wasn't a problem. I hoped Jake would try something new, but he didn't seem interested. After a few years, he had no jobs at all. He wasn't helping with housework either, so he became completely unemployed. When I was busy, Jake stayed at home with Max, which was helpful. But even after Max started elementary school, Jake didn't look for work. He just stayed home. I've been getting busier at work, so I haven't had the time to give Jake the attention he needs. I feel partly responsible for him being like this, and I've been trying to motivate him to work again. One day, I said, "You're 35 now. Why not try modeling for people in their 30s and 40s? I thought it might inspire him, but Jake said, "It's too much work, and the shoots take all day." That's what jobs are like though. Do you plan to never work again? I asked. He replied, "Actually, that sounds pretty great." What did he mean by that? Even though Jake isn't working, I didn't think about divorcing him. Max is still young, and Jake is a great father. Max loves him and calls him daddy. I didn't want to take Max's father away from him for my own reasons. Plus, Jake is still very handsome, even at 35. I think he's more attractive than most of the people I work with. Maybe it's because he still works out at the gym, and he looks great. If only he would work again, then he'd be perfect. One day, I saw my husband Jake wearing a suit in the morning. "What's going on, honey? Why are you dressed up?" I asked. "Oh, I have a job interview," he replied. "A job interview?" I asked, surprised. "Yeah, a friend of mine is a model, and he might be able to introduce me to an agency. They want to meet me or at least see what I'm like," he explained. "Really? Well, good luck. I hope it goes well," I said, happy to hear he was finally motivated to work. "Thanks, I'm heading out now," he said. I was so relieved to know that Jake was taking steps to get back to work. "Hey Max, maybe Daddy will be in a magazine again soon," I said to our son. "Wow, really?" Max replied excitedly. "If Daddy's in a magazine, I'll tell all my friends about it," Max said, grinning. I went to work that day feeling really good. After finishing up, I came home early to find out how Jake's interview went. But when I got home, he wasn't there. "Max, did Daddy come home yet?" I asked. "No, I don't think so," Max answered. I looked around, but Jake still wasn't home. It was after 2 a.m. when he finally walked in, clearly drunk. Since I had the day off the next day, I decided to stay up and wait for him. He barely noticed me as he collapsed onto the couch and fell asleep. I saw he was still holding his phone, and for some reason, I felt a strong urge to check it. I took his phone from his hand, unlocked it using his fingerprint, and looked at his messages. To my shock, I found intimate messages between Jake and a woman named Ruby. One of her messages said, "Dinner was delicious, and the hotel afterwards was so much fun." What was going on? I quickly took a photo of the conversation for proof. I recognized Ruby's face from her profile picture. She used to be a model for a fashion magazine, and I had worked with her a few times before. She had gotten married and quit modeling, so it seemed odd that she was now texting Jake like this. Were they both married and having an affair behind each other's backs? I felt a wave of anger, but I decided to wait until the next morning to see what Jake would say. When I woke him up, he seemed confused. I must have fallen asleep on the couch. Didn't you have a job interview yesterday? You didn't come home until 2 a.m., I reminded him. Job interview? He asked, acting surprised. Oh yeah, I did have the interview. But after that, I met up with an old friend at the office and we went out for drinks. We hadn't seen each other in a while, so we decided to catch up. I was suspicious. Who's this friend? I asked. He's just an old model friend. I don't think you've ever worked with him, Jake answered. I nodded, but something felt off. The way Jake was hiding details about meeting Ruby seemed fishy. I was sure now that he was having an affair, and once I have something to suspect, I can't let it go. I kept finding more and more things that made me suspicious, and the credit card bill was one of them. I used to buy clothes and things for work and hobbies on our shared credit card. But I had been so busy at work lately that I hadn't had time to shop. So the bill should have been lower than usual, but it was higher than normal. I looked back and realized it had been like this for the last few months. I'd just been too busy to check it earlier. I couldn't believe it. I started to suspect that my husband Jake was secretly using our credit card for something. I gave him the card for family expenses, and he usually spent about the same amount each month, so I didn't worry. But now, it seemed like he was spending a lot more money without telling me. I was sure it was to buy gifts for Ruby, his lover. Jake must have thought he could trick me with the story about his job interview. After that, he started going out more on weekends, saying things like, I was invited to go out with a friend from the agency. It was clear he was having an affair without any hesitation. I decided I would find out everything while I still could. One day, when Jake was out, I went into his room and started looking through his things. I found several receipts in his drawer. When I checked them, I saw that they were for women's brand bags. Jake had never bought me brand bags as gifts. I looked around his room, but I couldn't find any women's bags, so he must have given them to Ruby. I couldn't believe he used our shared credit card to buy gifts for his lover. If he's really using our credit card, then that means he's spending my money too. I never imagined my husband could be this selfish. At first, I thought Jake might not be working, but he was still thinking about me and our family. But one day, he said something that caught me off guard. One of my model friends invited me on a trip for the upcoming long weekend. I'm going. Really? But what about the money? I asked. Oh, I'll do it within my budget. It's not a problem. But if I turn it down, it might hurt my chances for future jobs, he said. What jobs? I have a friend who might be able to get me work. So if I stay on good terms with him, I might get a job. I couldn't believe the lie he was telling with such a straight face. I knew that trip was just an excuse for him to be with Ruby, but part of me felt lucky. It was finally my chance to get revenge on Jake. The day of his trip, I saw him off with our son, Max, both of us smiling. It was probably the last smile I'd give Jake. Then, I squatted down to Max's level and told him what I was thinking. Max, I want to live separately from your daddy. I know this is sudden, and I'm really sorry, but I want you to choose who you want to live with. Was I being too harsh, forcing a 10-year-old to make such a choice? But Max answered right away. I want to live with you, Mommy. Really? You won't be able to see Daddy as much anymore, you know? That's okay. Daddy's been making things hard for you, right? And he's been with a woman I don't know. What do you mean? Sometimes when I come home from school, I see this woman I don't recognize at the house with Daddy. What? He brought her into our house. Daddy says she was someone he was working with, but she always leaves when I show up, so I don't know who she is. How could Jake be so horrible and selfish? I couldn't believe he tried to deceive our son too. Hearing this, I was completely done with him. At first, I was going to just stop the credit card in time for Jake's trip, but then I changed my plans. I was going for full revenge. I knew who Ruby's husband was, and I had visited him at his home with a business associate a long time ago. They lived in a really nice house, and they probably hadn't moved out yet. I checked Ruby's Facebook and found her husband's profile. But they still live in the same house, based on the recent photos I saw. I contacted my parents and brothers, explained the situation, and they immediately came to help me pack up Jake's belongings. I sent Jake's things to the house where Ruby lived, along with the proof of the affair and a letter addressed to Ruby's husband. Then I suspended the credit card we shared, packed up my stuff, and moved out. Theo, now that we've stopped Daddy's card, let's get out of here. Yeah, sure. For now, we decided to go straight to my parents' house and stay there temporarily. It felt so relaxing to be back at my parents' place, enjoying my mom's home-cooked meal again. My brothers also stopped by, and we had a small family reunion. My dad was so happy to see his grandson, Theo. In the evening, I got a call from Jake. Hello. Oh, Lily, I'm really sorry, but I urgently need you to transfer some money to my account. Why? I'm a little short on cash. But you said you'd do it within your budget and savings. I did, but please, I'll pay you back later. How are you going to pay me back when you're not even working? Well, I'm about to get a job with the agency. I'll have money soon. Please, I beg you. You can't come home like this, or they'll stop working with me. I see. So where's this agency? Huh? You're about to get a job, right? Can you at least tell me the name of the agency and the model you're working with? Oh, you can't say it? Why? I completely forgot. Really? What are you going to do about that? I'll call the agency and check. No, don't do that. You'll embarrass me. I'm not buying your lies anymore. You're traveling with a woman, right? What are you talking about? Ruby Green. She's a former model you worked with. She's married now. Jake let out a scream, one I had never heard from him before, sounding really upset. That's crazy talk. Who did you buy all those brand goods for? You gave them to Ruby with our credit card, didn't you? I don't know what you're talking about. Well, it doesn't matter because the truth will come out soon. I suspended the credit card. I don't know if it's the hotel bill or the restaurant bill you can't pay, but you're on your own. When you get home, just sign the divorce papers. Goodbye. Divorce? What the hell are you saying? I hung up on him and turned off my phone. Now Jake wouldn't be able to reach me. He'd have to suffer through his trip. A few days later, Jake showed up at my parents' house, looking exhausted. Oh, Lily, I'm really sorry. Please forgive me. He dropped to his knees, begging. I won't forgive you. I already said I'm divorcing you. I can't stay with someone who betrayed our family like this. No, please. If this continues, it'll only make things worse for you. According to Jake, Ruby's husband found out about the affair when I sent Jake's things to Ruby's house. Ruby's husband came to Jake's house after the trip, and now Jake was in trouble because Ruby's husband was demanding alimony. Well, that's none of my business now, and of course, I'll be charging you and Ruby alimony too. You'll have to pay child support as well. Oh no, I'm sure you destroyed the divorce papers I left at home, so I've got new ones here. Jake had no choice but to sign the divorce papers, surrounded by my family. The divorce was finalized without any more drama. My ex-husband and his lover were both stuck paying alimony. Now, Jake works as a bartender to cover the alimony and child support payments. One of my colleagues visited the bar and told me that Jake was being taunted by younger coworkers, like hurry up and make this drink. Well, he deserved it. On the other hand, I rented an apartment near my office, where Theo and I now live happily. Theo is as handsome as Jake, but I'll make sure to raise him right so he doesn't turn out like his father. Jake was what you would call a typical good-for-nothing man. Why do so many handsome guys turn out to be pricks like him? Despite everything, I'm good at my job, diligent, logical, and smart. I hope that Theo inherits my personality and not his father's. Thank you for watching until the end. Please subscribe to our channel. We hope to see you in our next video. You had saved up $400,000, hadn't you? I used that money to buy a new house. My mother-in-law, Jane, reported one day that she had bought a house without even mentioning it to me. Furious, I confronted my husband about the situation, but he began to defend his mother, saying, "Let's just let Mom do what she wants. Let's give up on the $400,000. I couldn't let such an act go unpunished and vowed to seek revenge on both of them. My name is Rose. I married Tom 5 years ago, and we both worked at the same food manufacturing company. Our demanding jobs made it hard to spend much time together, but we understood each other and lived peacefully as husband and wife. However, my relationship with my mother-in-law, Jane, was strained from the start. When I first met Tom's family to announce our marriage, Jane had said, "You're planning to quit your job and support Tom after marrying him, aren't you?" "No," I replied. "I intend to continue working after our marriage. Tom and I have discussed this, and he agrees with my decision to keep working." "Isn't it normal for a bride to quit her job and support her husband at home after getting married?" Jane continued. "When I married my late husband, I quit my job and spent my life as a housewife. I found the notion that a wife should quit her job outdated but couldn't express this to Jane. I could only respond with a tight-lipped smile. Is Tom really okay with you continuing to work? When he comes home tired from work and you're not there, it will increase his burden." "That's only your opinion, Mom," Tom said. "I'm fine with it. Please let Rose do as she pleases." Thanks to Tom stepping in and stopping his mother, we weren't subjected to any more snide remarks and left his parents' house without further incident. I thanked Tom for standing up for me. If you hadn't intervened, I might have faced more unpleasant comments. "My dad passed away, and since then, my mom has been raising me on her own," Tom said. "She probably just worries. Don't think too much about it." I felt fortunate to be married to such a thoughtful person. As we headed back to our apartment, I reflected on how peaceful our life together had been. However, one day, after 5 years of marriage, Tom suggested living with his mother. "Hey, we often leave the house empty because of work. How about moving in with my mom?" he proposed. "Honestly, I don't like that idea," I said. "Is that so? Sorry for bringing it up suddenly. Forget I mentioned it." I was taken aback by the suggestion but relieved when Tom quickly accepted my response. We did end up living together, which was a relief. A week later, after Tom's suggestion, I returned home from a long day at work around 9:00 p.m. I was exhausted and muttering to myself as I tried to unlock the door, only to find it already open. Tom usually contacts me when he gets home, but he must have forgotten today. Entering the house, I called out, "I'm home." "Oh, you've finally come back," Jane said, appearing in the living room. "Tom hasn't come back yet. He gave me a spare key." "What? Tom had given a spare key to his mother without informing me?" I was stunned and frozen in place. Jane continued, "Don't just stand there. Can you prepare dinner? I've been waiting for you to come back." Mom, haven't you eaten yet?" I asked, bewildered. "Yes," she replied, as if it was perfectly normal for her to enter my house uninvited and expect dinner. Her audacity was astonishing. I was reluctant to confront Jane directly, but I couldn't just ignore her. "Is that so? All right, I can only make something simple. Is that okay with you?" I said, noticing some ingredients were missing. It felt like the fridge was more empty than it had been when I checked yesterday. "Something easy is fine. Please hurry up. I'm hungry." "Please wait a moment. I'll prepare it right away," I responded, trying to accommodate her request. I quickly prepared a meal and served it to Jane. "Thank you. I'll eat now," she said. After taking a sip of the miso soup I made, Jane remarked, "What is this? It doesn't taste good." I was taken aback. Did she really just say my miso soup wasn't good? "It doesn't taste good. Didn't you hear me?" Jane's criticism was unmistakable. "It seems you can only make such meals because you're always busy with work," Jane continued. "You should quit your job and focus on the household." "But Tom says he likes the meals I cook," I countered. "That must be flattery. Can't you even understand that?" she snapped. It was clear she disapproved of my working after marriage. For the next hour, Jane continued to make snide remarks. "I'll be visiting often from now on, so make sure you take care of the house properly," she said before leaving in a seemingly good mood after airing her grievances. About 30 minutes later, Tom came home. "Hey, did you give a spare key to your mom?" I asked. "Oh, yeah, I did," Tom replied. I was surprised to see her suddenly at our place today. After making her dinner, she said it was bad. "Well, these things happen. Don't worry about it," Tom said casually. "What kind of attitude is that?" I protested. "She suddenly shows up, mocks the food I made, and you're telling me to just endure it. This all started because you gave her the spare key." Tom's temper flared. "If you had agreed to live with her, it would have been better. I'm tired. I'm going to sleep. I don't need dinner. Am I to blame? You were the one who agreed to this," I said, feeling heartbroken by his response. The next day and the day after, the situation didn't improve. "The room is messy and it doesn't look like you've cleaned properly. The laundry is all wrinkled and unsightly," Jane complained every time she visited. Her frequent visits and constant dissatisfaction were becoming unbearable. I might have been able to tolerate her remarks, but a week after she started visiting often, it felt like my patience was wearing thin. I noticed something strange. The food supplies were dwindling again, and the detergent we had stocked up on was also missing. Our apartment and my in-laws' house are only a 10-minute walk apart, and it was clear that the daily disappearance of food and household items was abnormal. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it seemed Jane might be taking them without permission. One day, when she came over, I decided to confront her, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. "Mom, you haven't been taking our food and household items without asking, have you?" Jane admitted it without hesitation. "Oh, you found out, have you? It's not a problem for me to take things from my son's house. You're not home because of work, and it would be a waste if the food went bad." I was taken aback by her nonchalant attitude. How could she be so calm and unapologetic? I thought, indeed, it was Tom's house too, but that didn't justify her actions. "Speaking of which," Jane continued, "I should mention that you saved up $400,000, didn't you? I used that money to buy a new house." "What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "There's no need to pretend you don't know. You had it saved in a bank book, right?" I was surprised by how much was in it when I opened it. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. She used $400,000 of my savings to buy a house without anyone's permission, but you shouldn't have been able to withdraw the money with just the bank book. How did you get the PIN? "Oh, you had the PIN written on a note inside the bank book, didn't you?" Jane said with a smirk. "I found it quite easily. I guess I should thank you for making it so accessible." I had let my guard down, thinking no one would look into my bank book. Indeed, I had put a note inside to remember the PIN. I was looking for a better living environment, and this worked out perfectly, Jane said, laughing as she left my house. Her actions were unforgivable. Using someone else's money without permission was beyond reprehensible. I told Tom about how his mother used my money to buy a house, but his response was infuriating. He acted as if it were none of his concern and said, "Let Mom do what she wants. Just forget about the $400,000. His dismissive attitude was the last straw. My patience with both him and Jane had worn thin, and I couldn't tolerate any more of their behavior. I decided it was time for some revenge. The next day, I invited Jane over to our house under the pretense of discussing the situation. Before she arrived, I discreetly activated the voice recorder on my mobile phone to gather evidence. "Yesterday, you mentioned using $400,000 from my bank book without permission to buy a new house. Is that true?" I asked her. "Yes, it's true," Jane confirmed. "I've already paid the down payment and construction has started. With the bank book, it's as good as bought." "But just having the bank book doesn't mean anything," I pressed. "How did you plan to withdraw the money?" Jane smiled sweetly and said, "I have the seal, don't I?" "So you took the seal without permission as well?" I asked. "Mom, that would be considered theft." "Say whatever you want," Jane retorted. I never imagined someone who barely does any housework had saved up so much. At least it's somewhat useful. "Fine, you can have the bank book," I said, trying to keep my composure. "Thank you for coming today." I wanted to confront Jane in anger and reclaim the bank book and seal, but I restrained myself. I had secured evidence of Jane's theft and let her leave. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Jane," I thought. The following day, I called Jane again to retrieve what was stolen. "Mom, I don't mind giving you the bank book, but it seems personal identification is needed to withdraw the money. I'll go to the bank to withdraw it, so could you please bring the bank book and seal?" "All right," Jane agreed. "I'll bring them over." I hung up the phone, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. I had no intention of withdrawing the $400,000. In this day and age, you can't access such a large amount of money without proper identification. Jane's naivety was astonishing. She seemed completely oblivious to the gravity of her actions, blinded by the lure of easy money. After retrieving the bank book and seal from Jane, I went straight to the police station. "I need to report a crime," I said. "Jane took my bank book and seal without permission and intends to use them to buy a new house." "So, you're not the one making the purchase?" the officer asked. "No, it wasn't me. My bank book and seal were stolen. I'd like to file a report." The police took my statement seriously and accepted the report. That evening, when Tom came home, I informed him about the police report. I went to the police because your mother stole my bank book and seal. She might get arrested soon, I said. What? Why would my mom get arrested? Tom asked, sounding shocked. Because what she did is a serious crime. Just because you say, let mom do what she wants doesn't mean I have to tolerate her stealing from me, I replied. You didn't have to involve the police, Tom said defensively. Am I supposed to stay silent while she commits a crime just because she's a relative by marriage? I didn't save up all this money just to hand it over to Jane. Tom's face flushed with anger. So now you're calling my mother an old hack? That's enough, I said. I'm not going to let her get away with this. Tom stormed off to his room, only to return moments later with a divorce form. I never thought you'd say something like that. Sign this, he demanded. I was taken aback that he had a divorce form ready, but I was equally resolute. If this is how you feel, I'll sign it. Just get it over with, I said. Tom seemed surprised by my willingness to sign so quickly. After I completed the paperwork, he took the form and left. I showed Tom the divorce form. There should be no problem now. I'll submit this to the city hall myself, I said. It was clear he wanted to avoid facing me any longer. After our conversation, Tom quickly left the house, despite the late hour, likely heading to his mother's place. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Hello? I answered. It's Tom, came the voice on the other end. I told Mom that Rose filed a police report. Could you withdraw it? No way, I said firmly. Even if she's pretending to be remorseful, it doesn't change anything. I won't forgive her. She's likely to do this again. Another call came in. Hello? I asked, annoyed. I'm sorry, said a tearful voice. It wasn't Tom's but Jane's. She was crying and apologizing, but her tears did nothing to soften my stance. You think crying and apologizing will make me forgive you? You took not only the bank book but also the seal. How do you explain that? I've always wanted a single-family home, Jane explained. After living in apartments for so long, I couldn't resist using the money. I know it was wrong, but I've been managing our finances and saw the $400,000. I couldn't help myself. That doesn't excuse anything, I replied coldly. I worked hard for that money before I even married your son. You can't just make it right by apologizing. Reflect on this in prison. Jane tried to make another appeal. Please, I have a request. A request? Now? How audacious. What is it? I've already paid a $100,000 down payment for my savings, and I can't stop the construction. Could you lend me the $400,000, promising to repay it without fail? Are you delusional? I responded. There's no way I'm lending you anything. I can't trust someone who steals not just a bank book but also food and household items to repay me. What should I do then? Jane asked, desperation evident in her voice. That's your problem to figure out. I'm not responsible for cleaning up your mess. Why don't you ask your son to take out a loan? Jane's panic was almost amusing, but I had no sympathy left. Just as I was about to end the call, Tom intervened. Please don't abandon Mom. You were taken care of by her too. Even if it's not the full amount, please help her. Taken care of. She comes over every day just to criticize and has a spare key but doesn't help around the house. What care did she give me? I countered. Tom had no response, clearly grasping at straws in a desperate attempt to appeal to my emotions. I won't help at all. Good luck. Wait, I'll take care of Mom so she won't be a burden to you. Can we cancel the divorce? Tom pleaded. It's too late for that now, I said. Your mother is clearly the most important thing to you. You never protected me. I'm done. Enjoy your time with her. We'll be strangers by tomorrow. I hung up, turning off my phone to avoid more calls. Tom didn't return that night. They were probably comforting each other, and I was left to deal with the aftermath. I took a day off work to submit the divorce papers to City Hall. With that, Tom and I became strangers. Whatever happened to his mother was no longer my concern. During the 3 days leading up to my move, Tom and I barely spoke. I didn't initiate any conversation either. I planned to stay at my parents' house, an hour's commute from work, which was manageable. As I left the house that Tom and I had shared, he said, I'm sorry for everything. I ignored him and walked out. It was a surprising end to a marriage that had once been filled with love. Yet, strangely, I felt no sadness, only relief at being free from such a terrible mother and son. I couldn't forgive the hurtful words and actions. This outcome was a direct result of Tom's neglect and his constant prioritization of his mother over me. If he had taken a firm stand against her when she used my bank book to buy a house, perhaps I might have reconsidered. Jane and Tom had underestimated me. I wasn't going to end this passively. They would now face the burden of loan repayments, which was precisely what Jane wanted. They were both accountable for their actions. I reflected on this as I drove to my parents' house. A week later, the police contacted me to inform me that Jane had been arrested on suspicion of theft. It turned out that not living with her had been a decisive factor in her arrest. Had I lived with my mother-in-law, the case might have been considered theft among relatives, making an arrest difficult. I was relieved and thanked the police before ending the call. Jane would now have the chance to truly reflect on her crimes in prison. Just then, Tom called. "Hello. My mom got arrested." "I know. The police just informed me," I said. "With her gone, there's no way I can pay off the loan by myself. So what do you want from me?" "Are you asking for my help?" he replied. "No. Don't call me anymore," I said and hung up. To ensure he couldn't contact me again, I blocked his number and messages. A month later, a coworker told me something surprising. "Hey, did you hear? Tom quit the company." Tom and I worked at the same company, though we were in different departments, so we didn't interact much. With news of his mother's arrest spreading within the company, it seemed Tom found it too difficult to stay. I had no involvement in spreading the gossip and had no idea what happened to him afterward, but he was likely struggling with the loan repayments. 3 years later, I remarried someone I met completely outside of work, someone who truly values me. My new in-laws have welcomed me warmly, and I cherish them in return. I finally feel I've found true happiness and hope never to experience anything like before again. At the age of 12, my life changed dramatically when my family moved from Kenya to Canada. This transition opened up a vibrant new world filled with exciting opportunities, diverse cultures, and welcoming people. My father's success as a businessman ensured we enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle, making it easier to adapt to our new surroundings. During high school, I met Russell, the person who would later become my husband. Our relationship had its share of ups and downs over the years, but by the time I turned 22, we decided to take the leap and get married. I was ecstatic, envisioning a future filled with love and happiness. However, one significant hurdle lay ahead: Russell's mother, Doris, who was openly opposed to our marriage plans. I couldn't shake the feeling that her objections were partly rooted in my Kenyan heritage. Doris often made subtle, unsettling comments that left me feeling unwelcome. In contrast, Russell remained unfazed by the tension. He cherished our relationship and valued me for who I was rather than my background. Despite his mother's disapproval, he consistently affirmed his commitment to us. Our wedding day was emotionally complex. While I was thrilled to marry Russell, the shadow of Doris's disapproval loomed over us. Determined to focus on our love, I tried to ignore the negativity. In the days that followed, Doris's disdain became more pronounced. She frequently made disparaging remarks about my culture, which was painful. Despite my desire for a harmonious relationship with her, it seemed increasingly unattainable. Russell attempted to bridge the gap between us, promising to address the issues with his mother. Torn between his love for both Doris and me, he did his best to mediate, but the atmosphere remained tense. Doris's continuous jabs and intrusive questions about my background were disheartening and began to take a toll on my mental health. Despite these challenges, Russell and I focused on building our life together, moving into our own place, and pursuing our careers. However, Doris's persistent disapproval cast a shadow over our happiness, leading to a point where her remarks became unbearable. I had always prided myself on staying calm and treating everyone with kindness, but eventually Doris's hurtful comments pushed me too far. In a moment of frustration, I raised my voice for the first time. "Doris, I've truly had enough of your incessant comments. They're tiresome." "Oh, I'm just expressing my opinions. There's no need for you to be so defensive," she replied. "It feels like you're relentlessly targeting me because of my background. I deserve the same respect as anyone else. I'm not trying to offend, but you seem overly sensitive about everything." "This isn't about sensitivity, it's about respect. I am your daughter-in-law and should be treated with kindness and understanding. Perhaps if you tried to fit in a bit more, I wouldn't need to make these remarks." Fit in. I've been part of this community for years. This is my home, too. I shouldn't have to alter who I am just to appease you. And just so you know, I never sought your permission to marry your son, nor did I wish for it. I know you had different plans for him. That's unfair. We love each other, and that should matter to you. If only you were from a more traditional background, perhaps I'd be more accepting. I don't need your acceptance. I take immense pride in my heritage and refuse to let you belittle me for it. Your prejudice is your burden to bear. Well, maybe things would have been simpler if you'd married someone from your own culture. That's irrelevant. We are married, and you need to accept that. Your ongoing disapproval is causing us pain, and I won't allow you to dampen our happiness. I never expected you to speak to me like this. Why are you being so aggressive? Perhaps you never anticipated that I would stand up for myself. I'm done trying to please you. If this is how you feel, it might be best for us to keep our distance. That suits me just fine, she replied. I deserve to be surrounded by people who respect and appreciate me for who I am. You're being unreasonable. No, I'm simply tired of being mistreated. I'm part of your family now, whether you like it or not, and it's time you start treating me that way. If you can't manage that, then maybe it's better for us to maintain some space. Suit yourself, she said coldly. I will, and I hope you take some time to reflect on how your actions affect your relationship with your son, I retorted, deciding it was time to leave. Perhaps when you're ready to treat me with the respect I deserve, we can talk again. Until then, take care. I left the room, feeling a tumultuous mix of anger and sadness. Confronting Doris had been difficult, but standing up for myself was necessary. From that moment, I knew our relationship might be irreparably damaged. Yet I felt confident in my decision. I deserved respect and would no longer tolerate subtle jabs or hurtful comments. My focus had to remain on my marriage and building a joyful life with Russell, regardless of Doris's disapproval. When I shared the details of our confrontation with Russell, he surprised me with his unwavering support. He even told his mother that she needed to treat me with respect. However, the situation escalated dramatically when Doris threatened to disown him, shocking both of us. I could see the pain in Russell's eyes. His mother's willingness to cut him off for defending his wife was heartbreaking. Yet this difficult situation helped us realize something crucial. We didn't need toxic people in our lives, even if they were family. We deserve love and respect, and if someone couldn't provide that, they didn't deserve a place in our lives. As hard as it was to witness Doris's behavior, it served as a wake-up call for Russell. He began to understand that his mother's negativity and disapproval were holding him back from true happiness. It was time for him to move beyond the toxicity and build a life with me based on love and mutual understanding. Months passed since Doris cut ties with us. Although Russell was deeply affected by his mother's decision, he still missed her despite everything she had said and done. I went to support him in finding closure, hoping to pave the way for potential reconciliation. I planned a dinner date at Russell's favorite restaurant, hoping it would bring him some comfort and perhaps signal a new beginning for us. When we arrived and I gave my name, the host looked puzzled and informed me that my name was on the blacklist. I was taken aback. Russell and I had always been regular patrons. Confused and eager to clear up this misunderstanding, I requested to speak with the manager. To our astonishment, the manager emerged, revealing herself to be none other than Doris. During the months we hadn't seen her, she had taken on a new role. Managing this very restaurant, Applebee's, our favorite spot, it felt too calculated to be a mere coincidence, and a wave of shock and disbelief washed over me at her pettiness. Well, what do we have here? I never thought I'd see the day when you two would show up at my restaurant. Doris greeted us, not missing a beat as she informed us that we were not welcome. Russell's frustration bubbled over, and he began to raise his voice, drawing the attention of other diners. I felt torn, wanting to support him while also trying to prevent the situation from escalating further. Doris, we didn't come here to cause trouble. We just wanted to enjoy a peaceful dinner. I tried to reason with her. We just want a peaceful dinner. A peaceful dinner with the likes of you? I don't think so. It's quite amusing to see you both here, practically begging to be let in after everything that's happened, Doris retorted smugly. What are you talking about, Mom? We've always loved this place. Now you're saying we're not welcome. Russell asked, incredulous. It's quite simple. When he chose to marry her against my wishes, I had to make a decision. I couldn't allow my son to make such a dreadful mistake, so I decided to protect my business from your poor choices, Doris explained coldly. You're sick, Mom. It's disgusting that you're doing this on purpose just to spite us, Russell accused, his voice filled with dismay. Oh please, Russell. I'm just looking out for my reputation. I can't have people like you associating with my business. Doris dismissed him. "This is ridiculous. Mom, you're choosing your bigotry over your son. I thought you were better than this," Russell lamented, hurt evident in his voice. "You're the one who chose this path. Don't blame me for the decisions you've made," Doris shot back sharply. As she spoke, all eyes in the restaurant were fixed on us, casting an uncomfortable spotlight on the confrontation. It was deeply embarrassing to be escorted out of Applebee's, a place we had once enjoyed so freely. "Let's just leave. Arguing won't change her mind," I suggested quietly, eager to escape the escalating tension. "You're right, Janice. It's not worth it," Russell replied, disappointment etched on his face. "And don't come back. No one wants you here," Doris called after us, her voice dripping with disdain. Once outside, we wandered aimlessly down the street. Russell was clearly upset, so I encouraged him to open up about his feelings, especially regarding Applebee's. "Let it all out, Russell. How are you really feeling? I know this place meant more to you than just a restaurant. Applebee's was where my dad and I bonded. We'd sit by the window, order our favorite meals, and just talk for hours about everything. It's where we connected," he explained, his voice heavy with loss. "That sounds so meaningful, and I can't believe Doris would use it to hurt you like this. Especially knowing how much those moments with your dad meant to you. It's just so unfair. She knows how special Applebee's is to me, and yet she chose to use it against us just because she doesn't approve of our marriage. You deserve so much better than this, Russell. I wish I could fix this. It's awful to see someone trying to dismantle what we have. I always thought family was meant to support each other, not tear one another apart," Russell said, frustration etched on his face. "It's tough to make sense of why she acts this way, but sometimes people let their biases get the best of them. We might not be able to change that, but we can choose how we respond," I reassured him. "You're right. I'm done letting her negativity affect us. What matters is that we have each other." "Exactly. We'll face this together. And actually, I have some news that might brighten your day a bit," I said, trying to shift the mood. "What's that?" he asked, curiosity piqued despite the somber atmosphere. "Well, it turns out my dad recently acquired the entire block of buildings on this street, including Applebee's," I revealed. "Really? Why didn't you mention this before?" "It just happened. He finalized the deal with the investors recently, and I was still grappling with how everything would unfold. I had planned to share the news during a celebratory dinner at the restaurant." "That's incredible, Janice. I need to congratulate him later," Russell said, genuinely impressed. "We can do that later, but right now we need to address your mom," I replied, steering the conversation back to the pressing issue. "My dad is quite formidable in business matters, and he won't take kindly to how Doris treated us. He's going to handle this situation." Feeling a mix of urgency and determination, I decided to call my dad and put him on speakerphone so Russell could listen in. I explained everything that had transpired at Applebee's. "My dad was upset by the news. I knew Doris wasn't fond of you, but to kick you out of a restaurant, that's a new low. I'm sorry I hadn't reviewed the documents sooner. I only just received the title deeds for this property and hadn't had the chance to evaluate all the managers yet. But rest assured, I'll take care of this immediately. Don't worry at all. Give me 20 minutes and I'll be there to sort this out personally," he assured us. Hearing my dad's determined words brought me a sense of relief, though it was tinged with concern about what might unfold next. I knew my dad was more than capable of handling the situation, but I hoped it wouldn't escalate into something messier. He wasn't someone to be trifled with, especially in business, and he firmly believed in treating customers with fairness and compassion. So Russell and I waited nervously outside Applebee's, trusting that my dad would resolve the issue appropriately. We weren't exactly sure what he planned to do, but we believed in his judgment. Moments later, my dad arrived, walking with a confident stride that suggested he was ready to take on whatever needed to be done. As he entered, he called out for Doris, his voice carrying enough weight for everyone inside to hear. The tension in the restaurant was palpable as heads turned to watch the unfolding scene. Doris stepped forward, visibly annoyed by the interruption. She probably thought she could dismiss my father just as easily as she had dismissed us. But he wasn't one to be brushed aside lightly. He raised an eyebrow at her and began with a tone of faux concern. "Doris, my dear, it seems you haven't been keeping up with the latest developments. Did they forget to inform you about the new owner of the 2nd Green Avenue complex?" Doris appeared visibly shaken, clearly caught off guard by this unexpected turn of events. "What are you talking about? Who is it?" she stammered, confusion lacing her voice. My dad couldn't suppress a small knowing smile. Well, that would be me. I'm the new owner, and I must say, I've been here for less than a week and I'm already receiving troubling complaints about your management. Doris's complexion turned a shade paler as the reality of her predicament sank in. I didn't know that, she muttered, flustered. Well, perhaps if you had checked your emails or paid closer attention to what's happening around you, you might have known. But it's too late for apologies now, my dad replied with a chuckle. It was satisfying to see Doris on the receiving end of the treatment she had dished out to us. Russell, who had been quietly seething by my side, stepped forward with resolve. You had no right to treat us, or anyone, the way you did, especially Janice. We've always known you harbored ill will, but as someone in charge of a public establishment, you should have been the first to understand that discrimination based on personal prejudices is unacceptable. You've clearly violated that principle, and I don't think you're fit to manage this place. Now, desperate, Doris pleaded, "Wait, I'm sorry." I pointed out to Doris, even if you didn't know he was the owner, you should have treated all customers fairly without letting your personal biases interfere. Please, let's discuss this privately. Doris attempted to salvage the situation. There's no need, my dad interjected, his voice ringing loud enough for everyone to hear. I think everyone here would be interested to know that the person managing Applebee's, who allowed her racism to interfere with her professional duties, is no longer part of the staff. The murmurs in the restaurant grew louder, fueled by the unfolding drama. Doris, utterly embarrassed, could only stand in silence as the reality of her actions sank in. Russell and I watched, relieved that justice was being served. We felt a surge of relief and triumph, finally receiving some reparation after enduring Doris's harsh treatment for so long. My dad decisively handled the situation, warning her that he would call security to escort her out if she didn't leave voluntarily. Embarrassed and on the brink of tears, Doris began her walk of shame out of the restaurant. As she made her exit, the mood in the room instantly lifted. People began to clap and cheer, celebrating her departure. A profound sense of relief washed over me. Russell and I immediately went over to my dad, giving him a big hug to thank him for his decisive intervention. "You're the best, Dad," I said with a smile. He chuckled, giving us both a reassuring pat on the back. "It was my pleasure, my dear. I couldn't stand by and watch you two suffer because of her." Dad excused himself to check on the kitchen staff and find the next in command to appoint as the acting manager in the wake of the upheaval. He returned shortly after, explaining that he had important business matters to finalize, including formally terminating Doris and organizing the paperwork for the new acting manager. "Okay, my work here is done for now. You two enjoy your meal in the house," he said, signaling for us to take a seat and relax. As we settled down at a table, a whirlwind of emotions enveloped me. I was still processing how swiftly everything had escalated. Above all, I felt incredibly grateful for my dad's support and the strength he provided during this challenging time. It was comforting to know that no matter what happened, we had someone on our side, ready to step in when needed. I officially transferred the house to my parents, knowing a divorce was becoming inevitable. With a cold, detached expression, Henry pointed at me and demanded that I leave, his voice laced with venomous insults. His parents watched, their approving smiles making it clear they stood behind his cruel words. Despite the hostility, I stayed composed, fully prepared for this moment. I had packed my bags long before, ready for this day. Without hesitation, I walked out, leaving them oblivious to the consequences that would soon unfold. I'm Amy, and I recently celebrated my 45th birthday. It's been quite a while since Henry and I were married, and our children have grown up, forging their own paths away from home. Once an ordinary salaried worker, my life took a turn when a friend introduced me to teaching others how to create handmade accessories. This shift from hobby to profession has been transformative, bringing me immense joy through my interactions with students and the daily act of creating. While some might doubt the wisdom of turning a passion into a career, I find deep fulfillment in it. Henry and I met by chance at my previous workplace, where he was associated with a client company. Our frequent encounters at work-related events blossomed into a deeper relationship, leading us to marry for love. After 4 wonderful years, we welcomed a lively and healthy son who has since graduated from a prestigious university and is now thriving in a happy marriage of his own. Yet, despite our son's achievements, Henry and I have struggled over the years. The gentle, thoughtful man I married transformed into someone much harsher, becoming increasingly demanding and treating me more like a servant than a partner. His expectations shifted daily, turning our home into a battleground over the smallest issues. As his verbal outbursts intensified, I found myself yearning for a fresh start, desperate to escape the turmoil. However, an unpaid mortgage kept me tethered to our current situation. To make matters worse, Henry inexplicably quit his job and now spends his days idly at home, leaving me to handle all the household responsibilities alone. The house we live in is especially dear to me as I've financed its recent reconstruction with my savings. It stands as a testament to my dreams and hard work, a space crafted for my vision and effort. The spacious kitchen, thoughtfully designed, showcases my taste. Although Henry had some input in the layout, I ultimately covered all the expenses and ensured my preferences were realized. Building this house was both a challenge and a joy, embodying everything I had hoped for. Unfortunately, the financial burden was heavier than expected, forcing us to take on a larger loan than we had planned. Taking on such a significant financial burden in our 40s felt overwhelming, but the promise of happiness in our new home gave us the strength to manage the debt. Yet Henry remained dissatisfied. His input was only minimally reflected in the final design, and he frequently complained, dismissing the expenses as wasteful and akin to throwing money away. Despite his grievances, I chose to focus on the joy our new home brought, trying to ignore his discontent. As time passed, Henry's complaints grew quieter, and he began to express his frustration through childish behaviors, like scattering trash and creating messes to irritate me. I'd often found myself wondering when this cycle of conflict would come to an end. A few months after we moved in, as these thoughts swirled in my mind, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. We weren't expecting any visitors, which sparked my curiosity. Just as I was about to answer the door, Henry jumped up and moved to open it himself, as if he knew who it might be. Soon, cheerful voices and laughter floated in from the entrance. When the living room door finally swung open, I was taken aback to see my in-laws, Willie and Catherine. My relationship with them had always been strained. From the moment we announced our marriage, they had been cold and critical of my background, maintaining an uncomfortable distance even on our wedding day. Their sporadic visits since then always left me uncertain about how to navigate each encounter. Despite the lack of recent communication, their unexpected arrival left me feeling unsettled. I greeted them politely, though a hint of tension lingered in the air. They walked past me without a word, pointedly ignoring me and even brushing against my shoulder as they explored the house. Their envy was palpable as they admired the spacious, well-designed kitchen. Meanwhile, Henry reveled in their attention, proudly showing them around. When they returned, their faces reflected satisfaction, but Henry's mood shifted sharply. He turned to me with a stern expression and loudly commanded me to prepare tea and snacks quickly. Taken aback by his sudden outburst, I hurried to fulfill his request, feeling the weight of the moment as I set about making tea and snacks. Despite my efforts to be welcoming, Henry's parents appeared unsatisfied. Willie quickly polished off his snacks and tea, offering only a brief compliment about the house's interior. Amidst this, Henry, beaming with pride, extended an invitation for his parents to move in with us, hardly acknowledging my presence at all. As they listened to Henry and prepared to leave, I stood back, watching their retreating figures. The gap between Henry and me felt immense, especially as I saw him so animated and joyful with his parents, a side of him I hadn't witnessed in a long time. After Henry's invitation, his parents began visiting more frequently. What started as a few times a month quickly escalated to several times a week, and soon they were almost here every day. With each visit, their criticisms of me intensified, and Henry did nothing to intervene. Instead, he grew increasingly blameful, voicing relentless complaints about how I was supposedly upsetting our son. Amid the mounting challenges, I found myself unable to voice my growing frustration, settling instead for constant apologies. The visits from my in-laws became more frequent, often occurring while I was away. Henry and his parents left clear evidence of their activities behind: beer cans, empty bottles, and alcohol spills that stained our new rug. Despite my objections, our home began to smell of booze and felt increasingly neglected. Henry's complaints about my contributions felt particularly ironic, given that he did nothing to help around the house. His involvement in gambling added another layer of stress. Betting slips frequently appeared, highlighting the financial risks and the futility of trying to explain the dangers of his habit. The losses were especially painful as the money wasted was hard-earned for my relentless efforts. As the in-laws' visits became more frequent, they often timed their arrivals for when I was out. This made it increasingly difficult for me to manage the situation or assert any control over the growing chaos and discomfort in our home. One day, when I unexpectedly returned home early, I found Henry and his parents comfortably settled in our living room. Surprised, I confronted them, but their dismissive responses and snarky attitudes made it clear they saw my presence as an annoyance. Frustrated and stressed by their insolence, I realized I had reached my breaking point. Instead of succumbing to my emotions, I resolved to devise a plan to manage the situation effectively. In the midst of this turmoil, an unexpected incident unfolded. On a day I would typically be away, the in-laws arrived unannounced, their surprise at finding me home unmistakable. I couldn't resist making a sarcastic remark about their usual avoidance of me, but they brushed it off as they confidently entered the house. Henry greeted them with a warm smile and proceeded to show them around from the kitchen to the bathroom. As I watched their thorough inspection, suspicion crept in. It felt like there was a hidden agenda behind their visit. When they left, their satisfied expression suggested they had uncovered something significant. Curious and increasingly cautious, I questioned their need for such thorough inspections and wondered if there was something they felt compelled to tell me. I had previously warned Henry not to pry into my concerns, insisting it was none of his business, yet his behavior suggested he was hiding something. I suspected he was trying to manipulate the situation, though identifying his exact intentions proved difficult. My best option was to quietly observe and decipher the unfolding scenario. Then one day, after work, I returned home to a startling sight. A large moving truck parked in front of our house, emblazoned with the logo Moving Center. Henry was deep in conversation with the truck driver and several representatives. When our eyes met, he quickly averted his gaze and hurried back inside. To my shock, my in-laws arrived at the same time. They greeted me casually as if nothing were wrong, while Henry welcomed them with open arms, ushering them into the house. The tension in the air was palpable, signaling that significant changes were about to impact our living situation. As I followed Henry and his parents inside, I was struck by the dramatic transformation of our home. The familiar furnishings and personal items that once filled the space had vanished, replaced by my in-laws' outdated furniture, arranged as if they had already moved in. Sitting on the sofa, I was surrounded by their smirking smiles, radiating a sense of smugness. Their demeanor made it clear that this change wasn't spontaneous but part of a well-orchestrated plan. Feeling a mix of anxiety and determination, I opted to stay silent and observe what would unfold next. The anxious glances exchanged between my in-laws only intensified the already tense atmosphere. Soon, they hinted that there was something important they needed to discuss, suggesting an ulterior motive. Steeling myself and maintaining a calm facade, I listened as Henry took a deep breath and revealed that he had sold the house to his parents. He then proposed we get a divorce, and his parents nodded in agreement, their smug smiles betraying their satisfaction in orchestrating this situation. Despite the shocking revelation, I managed to stay composed, having suspected their scheming all along. I quickly signed the divorce papers, set my wedding ring on the table, and announced my decision to leave. My suspicions about Henry and his parents' deceitful behavior during their frequent visits while I was away had prompted me to take precautionary measures. I had installed surveillance cameras throughout the house, which I could access via my smartphone. Initially, I monitored their casual interactions, but it wasn't long before I stumbled upon footage that confirmed my worst fears. In the video, Henry and his parents were seen happily discussing the sale of the house. Shocked but now fully aware of their intentions, I began to plan my next steps carefully. Armed with evidence from the surveillance, I started searching for a new place to live, determined to move on from this betrayal. Taking decisive action, I initiated the transfer of the home loan from my name to Henry's. If they intended to force me out of our shared home, it only seemed fair that they should assume the mortgage payments and all associated responsibilities. With a monthly payment of $3,800, an amount drawn from my hard-earned salary, I had serious doubts about whether Henry and his parents, considering their current employment situations, could handle such a financial burden. Determined to sever all financial ties, I refrained from offering any support. Now free from the burdens of that relationship, I moved into a new, well-organized home furnished with fresh items, eager to start anew. On a tranquil day off, savoring the luxury of sleeping in past noon, my relaxation was abruptly shattered by the doorbell. To my surprise, Henry and his parents stood at my doorstep, uninvited and unexpected. They barged in without waiting for an invitation and spread a document in front of me, accusing me of illegally altering the loan terms without their consent. I was taken aback by their audacity. They explained that shortly after I had left the old house, they received notification of the loan name change. Henry and his parents, all currently unemployed, were stunned, claiming they couldn't afford the steep monthly payments. In a heated outburst, Henry insisted they wouldn't cover the costs. I tried to reason with them, explaining the consequences of defaulting on the loan, including how interest and late fees could significantly increase their financial burden. Henry listened, initially skeptical, but began to grasp the seriousness of the situation. When Henry looked up the loan information online, shock and distress washed over his face. I suggested it was time for them to explore new job opportunities for a fresh start. Their expressions grew even paler as the reality of their situation sank in. They confessed to having no savings or assets, with Henry burdened by significant gambling debts and lacking the steady income. They pleaded for understanding and assistance, referencing the years we had spent together. Unmoved by their appeals, I shut the door firmly, determined to distance myself from any attempts to salvage the relationship. Frustrated, they reported me to the police, which ultimately resulted in their removal from my property. Due to their financial struggles, they eventually moved to a more affordable apartment on the outskirts of town, where Henry managed to secure a part-time job to support his family. Meanwhile, my life continued on an even keel. I focused on my job and, in my spare time, started a blog about handmade crafts. The blog gained traction, leading to a substantial increase in my monthly income as requests for workshops and courses began to pour in. I had no intention of remarrying and was determined to navigate life on my own terms. One day, I stumbled upon an old household account book from the early days of my marriage. As I flipped through its pages, memories of our financial struggles flooded back. With a renewed sense of purpose, I resolved to carve out a new path toward happiness on my own. After reflecting on the past, I returned the account book to the shelf, ready to focus on creating a fulfilling future. Ever since we exchanged vows, my husband, a classic mama's boy, had been noticeably absent from household chores. His dependence on me became painfully clear when I mentioned an upcoming business trip. Panic set in as he exclaimed, "Who will take care of me while you're gone?" After a heated argument, I left for my week-long journey. When I returned, I found a note next to completed divorce papers. It read, "Since you abandoned the housework, I'm going back to my parents. Consider the divorce papers and think it over." Rage boiled inside me at his audacity to threaten divorce, but as I calmed down, I began to see a glimmer of clarity. Perhaps this was the push I needed. Maybe a divorce wasn't such a bad idea after all. Resolved, I filed the papers the very next day. The following morning, my astonished husband stormed in, demanding to know where the divorce papers were. When I told him I had filed them, he broke down, utterly baffled and crying uncontrollably. "My name is Grace, and at 32 years old, I've been married just over a year. After college, I diligently climbed the ranks at a prominent company. Approaching my 30s without a romantic partner, my parents pressured me to settle down, leading me to reluctantly join a dating agency. That's where I met Edward, a soft-spoken man a few years younger than me who worked at a mixed firm. We connected over several dates, and his respectful demeanor made me think he was the one. When he proposed, I was overjoyed, envisioning a life together. However, our marriage unveiled challenges I hadn't anticipated. After our engagement, during a visit to my parents, they impressed upon us that marriage is a lifelong commitment. "Grace, always be there for Edward," they advised, and I nodded while Edward listened intently. Next, we visited Edward's parents. His father, Arthur, welcomed me warmly, saying, "I've heard so much about you from my boy. It's great to finally meet you." His mother, Michelle, was more reserved, scrutinizing me before asking, "Is this the one?" Edward confidently replied, "Yep, Mommy. I want to marry her." I was taken aback by his use of Mommy and Michelle's bluntness. Arthur quickly stepped in, apologizing for her directness and assuring me, "We're very happy about your marriage, but just so you know, Edward has had it pretty easy here. He might be a bit of a challenge." I reassured them, "I adore Edward's gentle side, and I know we'll support each other." Arthur turned to Edward, urging him to step up and keep me happy. Edward nodded earnestly, and not long after, we celebrated our union with a low-key wedding. To our delight, my parents gifted us a condo, marking the beginning of our married life. However, it soon became evident that Edward was unaccustomed to household responsibilities. One morning, while I was busy with laundry and preparing breakfast, Edward's alarm rang at 8, yet he continued to sleep soundly. Despite my efforts to wake him, he wouldn't budge. Finally, I pulled off his covers and gave him a gentle shake. Slowly, he opened his eyes, groggily exclaiming, "Wow, it's 8:10 already. Why didn't you wake me up?" I reminded him that I had tried and that his alarm was blaring too. "Now please eat your breakfast." As he rubbed his eyes and shuffled to the table, he immediately complained about the eggs. "Hey Grace, this egg is too runny. I can't eat this unless it's well done. Make it over," he demanded, caught off guard while I hung laundry. I struggled to hold back my irritation and snapped, "Then don't eat it. Why would you say that? And this coffee is scorching hot. Mommy always got the eggs and coffee just right." All right, I sighed, quickly redoing the eggs and letting the coffee cool. He ate hurriedly, leaving his plate on the table as he rushed toward the restroom. "Wait up, you know you should clean up after yourself," I called after him, but he dismissed my concerns. "Gee, I'm short on time." Annoyed, I paused my makeup routine to clean the dishes while picking out my outfit. Then he called out again, "Grace, over here. Help with my tie." There he stood, tie hanging limp around his neck, looking utterly helpless. "Seriously, you can't even tie your tie? What did you do before we got married?" "Mommy always did it," he replied sheepishly. With a deep exhale, I tied his tie and somehow we both managed to leave the house. This had become our routine. He never helped with any housework, and it felt like I was juggling everything while babysitting him too. Every time an issue arose, it was always, "Mommy did it this way," or "With Mommy, it went like that," always referencing his mother Michelle. This pattern dragged on for a year, and as the pressures mounted, thoughts of divorce began to creep into my mind. My father's insistence that marriage is forever echoed in my thoughts, tempering my frustrations. However, an unexpected hiccup at work led to a week-long business trip starting the next day. When I broke the news to my husband that evening, he paused his video game, clearly surprised. "Hold up, a business trip for a whole week? It's out of my hands. Work's calling," I explained. "No way. Who's going to cover for you here for a week?" he asked, irritation creeping into his voice. "You'll have to step up. It's about time you got a grip on the household duties," I responded, and he set down his controller, locking eyes with me. "Isn't the wife supposed to care for her husband in the house? Are you just bailing on that?" His question was steeped in outdated expectations. "Seriously, that's such old school thinking. We both have jobs. We should be a team," I countered. "That's not how I see it. Mommy was always on top of things at home," he retorted. I couldn't help but point out, but she was a stay-at-home mom. Honestly, it's kind of odd hearing an adult man constantly talk about mommy. He bristled at my words. "What's your deal? Taking shots at me and my mommy?" "I'm not, but let's be real. You're a mama's boy. This is how you see me. You think you can talk to me like that?" His defensiveness escalated, and I felt my frustration peak. "Face it, you're a mama's boy. You can't get up without help. You can't even tie your tie. And you won't lift a finger around the house. You're constantly comparing me to your mom. For once, handle your stuff." "Really? You're going to come at me like that?" That's why I was iffy about marrying someone older. "Should have sided with mommy and chosen a younger, perkier girl," he shot back. His words struck a nerve, and our conversation spiraled into a major blowout. Even joking, "You shouldn't say stuff like that. We're married," I said, trying to anchor the conversation to the commitment we had made to each other. The tension was palpable, revealing the deep rifts that had formed in our relationship. When my husband hinted at divorce during our heated argument, I was taken aback. With a smug tone, he challenged, "You can't possibly want a divorce, can you? You wouldn't want to be labeled divorced. And think about what your dad said about sticking together." Then, with a sharp edge, he added, "Well, I just did. If you go on this business trip and leave me here alone, I'm seriously considering a divorce." With those words, he stormed off to our bedroom, leaving me stunned. Despite the shock, the idea of divorce lingered in my mind, a thought I had previously wrestled with, fearing I would disappoint my parents. But now it seemed like a viable option to consider seriously. Heavy with these thoughts, I went to bed. The next day, I woke early to prepare for my trip. The fallout from our argument still weighed heavily on me. but I had work commitments to attend to. I nudged Edward, who was still curled up under the covers. I'm heading out. You better wake up or you'll be late for work. His response was a sleepy mumble, unintelligible and dismissive. Rolling my eyes, I left. A few hours later, a text from him popped up on my phone. You barely tried to wake me. Now I'm running late. Did you really go on that trip? I quickly replied, I did wake you up, and yes, I'm on my trip. I'll be back in a week. He read my message but didn't reply. Mid-trip, I decided to call my parents to update them on Edward's behavior and share my growing inclination toward divorce. I braced myself for a lecture, unsure how they would react to the possibility of our marriage ending. The call was going to be difficult, but I needed their advice and support. Their response took me by surprise. We had no idea he behaved like this. Take your time to think, but don't force yourself to stay in a situation that isn't right. Always remember, we're in your corner, no matter what you decide. Their words of unconditional support brought tears to my eyes. Upon returning from my business trip, I felt a mix of clarity and determination. I knew a serious conversation with Edward was inevitable. If he didn't show any signs of change, I was ready to consider divorce more seriously. My mind buzzed with thoughts as I walked into our house late in the evening, only to find Edward wasn't home yet. As I looked around, a set of signed divorce papers and a note on the table caught my attention. The note read, Since you ditched the housework, I'm heading back to my folks. Check out the divorce papers and think things over. My initial reaction was rage. How dare he threaten me with divorce? But as my anger subsided, I began to see the situation differently. Maybe this was a sign that ending things might not be such a bad idea after all. With that realization, I decided to file the papers. When the divorce was finalized, I felt a heavy weight lift from my shoulders. That evening, I went to bed and slept more soundly than I had in a long time. The next morning, as I enjoyed a peaceful cup of coffee, the door swung open and in walked Edward, clearly upset. Why didn't you come to my parents' place to apologize? What's gotten into you? He demanded, his temper flaring. Then, noticing the empty spot where the divorce papers had been, his expression shifted from anger to shock. Hold on, where are the divorce papers? Oh, I filed them, I replied calmly. You did what? He looked as if he had been slapped. You went through with it. Thanks for signing them. It made everything smoother, I said, trying to keep my composure. You can't be serious. Did you really go all the way? Have you lost your mind? He exclaimed, unable to hide his astonishment at my decisiveness. Seeing how composed I remained sent him into a complete frenzy. That's it. I'm calling my parents. Sure, knock yourself out, I replied, unfazed by his threat. I knew I had made the right decision for myself. An hour after the confrontation, I felt a sense of clarity settling in. When Edward's parents, Michelle and Arthur, arrived at our apartment, Michelle immediately spotted me and dramatically exclaimed, You! How could you just divorce Edward like that? What's wrong with you? I replied coolly, if he had the divorce papers all filled out and ready to go, doesn't that suggest he wanted out? Is that a problem? How can you be so bold when you're just his wife? She shot back. Before the situation could escalate, Arthur intervened, his voice firm. Enough. The room fell silent as he turned to me. Grace, can you walk us through what happened? I agreed and began to detail the ongoing issues, our argument before my trip, and the divorce papers Edward had left for me. I was at my wit's end. It seemed like he wanted a divorce, so I went with it. I maintained eye contact with Arthur, hoping to convey the depth of my frustration. Just as I finished, Edward interjected, Mom, Dad, come on, can't you see she's out of line? Tell her off. Michelle quickly sided with Edward. Oh, Edward, my poor baby, she's being so hasty. You should reverse the divorce right now. There's no reversing it. Our divorce is final. We're strangers now, I stated firmly. Michelle's face turned red, and she opened her mouth to respond. But once again, Arthur cut her off. Zip it, Michelle. He then turned to me, apologizing for Edward's behavior. Then facing Edward, whose eyes were wide with surprise, Arthur continued, You bonehead. I knew you had issues, but this, using divorce papers as a threat, unbelievable. You had it coming. Michelle tried to interject, but Arthur wouldn't let up. It's partly on you, Michelle. You spoiled him. Watch out. If you keep this up, I might divorce you too. The tension in the room was palpable as Arthur confronted the reality of the situation, leaving Edward and Michelle speechless. After the intense discussion, Michelle appeared visibly shaken, her mind lingering on Arthur's unexpected threat of divorce. She murmured to herself, troubled. Arthur then turned his attention back to me, his expression marked by sincere regret. Grace, I deeply regret the trouble our clueless son has caused you. It's clear he has a lot to learn. Please move on and find happiness in your life, Arthur implored, his concern genuine. I thanked Arthur for his understanding and watched as he left, taking a dejected Edward with him. It didn't take long for the news to spread through our circle. Arthur had decided to sever financial and emotional ties with Edward, a drastic move aimed at pushing him towards self-sufficiency. Soon after, Edward's life spiraled downward. He moved into a modest, somewhat neglected apartment, his first experience living truly on his own. The transition was anything but smooth. His new home quickly descended into chaos, mirroring his disorganized personal life. With no one to rely on and a habit of tardiness, he soon found himself unemployed, unable to adhere to a schedule. Meanwhile, the dynamics within his family deteriorated further. Michelle, who had always meddled in Edward's affairs, crossed boundaries one too many times, resulting in a serious fallout with Arthur. This ultimately led to their separation. Michelle moved in with Edward, and together they struggled to find stability, scraping by with low-end jobs. Their lives became a series of unfortunate events and poor decisions with no clear path to improvement. In stark contrast, my life took a different turn. Free from the daily stresses and emotional drain of my relationship with Edward, I found myself alone in our condo, which now felt surprisingly spacious and full of potential. With renewed energy and focus, I dedicated myself to my career. The absence of Edward's negative influence allowed me to excel at work, and my professional life flourished as a result. Feeling liberated and optimistic, I embraced my newfound independence. My living space transformed into a true sanctuary where I could relax and plan for the future. The improvement in my work life was palpable. Each day brought a sense of excitement and anticipation for what lay ahead. The contrast between my thriving existence and Edward and Michelle's downward trajectory was stark. While they were no longer a part of my life, the lessons learned from our time together resonated deeply, reinforcing my commitment to personal growth and happiness. I've decided to purchase the luxury car from you, Tiffany. Honestly, an ordinary person like me doesn't need such extravagance, but my parents have been thinking about getting a new car, and it might be just the right fit for them. Since marrying Peter, I've noticed a change in him. He's become more self-centered, even coveting the upscale car my parents gifted to me. Frankly, I've had enough. My name is Tiffany, I'm 28 years old, and I met Peter during our college days. We've been married for 3 years now. Peter is the social butterfly, well-liked by everyone, which is quite the opposite of me. I'm more introverted and have only a handful of close friends. Our relationship started unexpectedly. At first, we bonded over shared courses and study sessions. His interest in me caught me off guard, but when he asked me out, I was so overjoyed that I didn't hesitate to say yes. That was the beginning of our relationship. What drew me to Peter was his charm, his easygoing nature, and his dedication to his studies. He had plenty of friends, many of them attractive and stylish women, so it never felt like he'd struggle to find another girlfriend if he wanted to. In fact, I once asked him nervously if he truly thought I was the right one for him. His reaction was puzzling. He seemed surprised and asked why I'd even asked something like that. I confessed that I often felt insecure and just wanted to understand what made him choose me. After a moment of thought, he simply said that he felt comfortable with me. It wasn't the heartfelt response I had hoped for, and before I could say more, he grew distant, distracted by his phone. Not wanting to start an argument, I dropped the subject and apologized for bringing it up. But the doubts lingered. As time went on, our relationship moved forward smoothly. On the surface, at least. We graduated, got married, and settled into a condo. I found a stable job at a company while Peter continued his graduate studies and part-time work. When I told my mom about our engagement, she was thrilled, though she admitted she and my dad were beginning to worry about when I'd finally introduce a boyfriend. I felt a little guilty for not telling them about Peter sooner, but my mom, understanding my independent nature, was simply happy knowing I had someone in my life who cared about me. My parents have always been my role models. They met in college, just like Peter and me, and have maintained a deep love and respect for each other throughout the years. My dad worked his way up the corporate ladder, while my mom pursued her passion for cooking, eventually teaching culinary classes. They always respected each other's independence and supported each other's dreams, and I hope to create a marriage like theirs. Despite growing up in a well-off family, I've always valued independence. That's why I didn't pursue graduate school like Peter. I wanted to stand on my own and build my own life. My dream has always been simple, to have a family like the one I grew up in, with a strong marriage and perhaps children someday. It may sound straightforward, but for someone like me, it's a significant goal. After Peter and I moved in together, things started to change. Peter was still in graduate school and working part-time, but he didn't contribute much financially. When I gently brought it up, suggesting it would help if he used more of his income for our expenses, he brushed it off, saying, "I do contribute, you know. Didn't you say you'd take care of the living expenses when we moved in together, Tiffany?" His words made me uneasy. Peter had always dreamed of becoming a professor, and that's why he was so focused on his graduate studies. But while he chased his ambitions, I was left feeling like I was carrying most of the financial burden alone. I had reassured Peter not to worry about finances, given my stable job, but when he shot back at me, I could only mumble a weak agreement, unsure of how to respond. Peter let out a heavy sigh. "You wouldn't understand, Tiffany. Being a graduate student is expensive." He paused before adding, "Besides, socializing is part of it too." Then, as if it were an afterthought, he said, "Oh, and I need $1,000 for a research trip. Can you lend it to me? I'll pay you back later." Requests like these became more frequent, and the strain on our relationship grew. He started spending more nights away, leaving me alone with cold, untouched meals and unanswered phone calls. When he finally returned, often in good spirits, I found myself too forgiving. Out of the blue, he'd suggest, "Hey Tiffany, remember you wanted to go somewhere? I have tomorrow off. Let's go." Or he'd compliment my cooking, making me feel momentarily appreciated. Every time Peter showed kindness, I caught glimpses of the happy marriage I longed for. It made me hesitate to confront the deeper issues, even though, deep down, I knew something was wrong. I felt increasingly lonely and anxious, trapped in a cycle of brief moments of joy followed by prolonged periods of solitude. I found myself unable to share these struggles with anyone, especially my parents, who were genuinely thrilled about our marriage. Even so, they must have sensed that something was off. I hadn't visited them in a while, and when I finally did, my dad suggested I stay for dinner. My mom prepared an elaborate meal to welcome me, and during the meal, my dad mentioned that Aunt Lori had recently visited. She wanted to see me, he said, describing her as spontaneous, ambitious, and fiercely independent, the same traits that had always defined her. "I'll reach out to her soon, thanks, Dad," I replied, appreciating their subtle way of encouraging me to reconnect with family. As my dad reminisced about how much Aunt Lori cared for me, he smiled, recalling how she'd playfully teased that Peter had stolen me away, even though she had never intended to marry herself. Before I met Peter, Lori had been more of a confidant than an aunt. I could talk to her about things I couldn't discuss with my parents. She understood me on a deeper level and had always been there to support me, especially in the beginning. I had always been too timid to discuss my relationship with Peter, especially with Lori. But now I felt eager to reconnect. A few days after visiting my parents, I met Lori at a cafe. She was as stylish as ever. As she looked over my outfit, she offered gentle advice. "You know, Tiffany, marriage is just the beginning of a lifelong journey for a woman. You should always feel confident and attractive, no matter what. Your clothes can make a big difference, so don't forget to take care of yourself." With a graceful smile, she took a sip of her tea. Realizing how much I had neglected my own interests, I apologized for not keeping in touch. Lori chuckled and said, "That's so typical of you, Tiffany. It's good to be honest and serious, but being too timid often comes from a lack of experience. Still, I was thrilled when I heard you found someone special." I thought, finally, Tiffany is taking a step forward. It had been ages since I spent time with someone on a day off, and the weather was perfect, making our outing even more refreshing. We settled on the terrace, basking in the warm sunlight. In that tranquil moment, I felt comfortable enough to share my concerns with Lori. At first, I had believed that even someone as reserved as I could make a relationship work with Peter. But lately, doubts had been creeping in. Lori listened attentively, nodding empathetically without interrupting. When I finished, she asked softly, "I suppose you haven't mentioned any of this to your parents, have you, Tiffany?" "No," I admitted. "I even hesitated to tell you today. I didn't want to reveal my vulnerabilities to anyone. I thought I should be able to handle this on my own to prove that I can be truly independent." If Mom and Dad found out, they'd probably want me to move back home right away. I want to try and handle this by myself as much as I can. Lori respected my decision, not pushing the matter further. But she gently assured me, if you ever need help, let me know first. If my dear Tiffany asks, I'll be there for you, no matter where I am. A month later, my mom called me casually. When you have time, could you come over? It's nothing urgent. Since I had the next day off, I decided to visit my parents. As I pulled up to my parents' house, I noticed a new car parked in the driveway. Excitement bubbled up inside me. Dad, is this car new? Did you just get it? Can I take it for a spin? I joked, my enthusiasm evident as I admired the sleek vehicle. Don't worry about that, Dad said, smiling warmly. This car is for you, Tiffany. Use it however you like. It'll come in handy. Mom added softly, we saw this car in a TV commercial and remembered you said you liked it. So, it's our gift to you. You've been having a tough time lately and we wanted to cheer you up. If things get rough, just drive this and come home anytime. The SUV from a renowned international brand was a thoughtful gesture that filled me with a deep sense of support and freedom. Dad had even arranged a parking spot near my condo for the new SUV. Overwhelmed, I laughed in disbelief, struggling to comprehend the generosity of their gift. Later, as I drove downtown, I reached into my pocket, retrieved the car key, and pressed the button. The SUV's lights flashed brightly around me. It was then that I heard a familiar voice from behind. What's with the new car? Peter asked. I turned to see my husband, who hadn't been home for what felt like an eternity. His presence left me momentarily speechless. He looked at the car with a smug grin. Ah, I see. A gift from your parents? Every time I faced Peter, I struggled to find my voice, but I was tired of feeling diminished. Peter, don't you care anymore? Do you even care about me? I managed to ask, summoning my courage. Peter's response was a bombshell. Are you just realizing this now? Did you think I loved you all this time? It's ridiculous how hopeful you are. His mocking laughter echoed in my ears. Something inside me snapped. Then why did you marry me? I retorted louder than usual. Peter's cold reply was shocking. Wow, you're going to be that blunt about it. So marrying me was just a means to an end for you, huh? And now you want the car too. It's wasted on you. I couldn't believe the harshness of his words. Peter remained unfazed by the pain he caused. With chilling indifference, he added, You know, we're getting a divorce. Without me, you'll never find another man. Think about it. With those cruel words, Peter left without a second glance, leaving me feeling both angry and heartbroken. My head pounded with a headache as I sat in the driver's seat, trying to calm myself. Eventually, I reached out to Aunt Lori for advice after a few days of reflecting on the situation. I agreed to the divorce and moved back in with my parents. They welcomed me with open arms, and for a while, life felt peaceful again. However, that peace was short-lived. One afternoon, Peter showed up at my parents' house, accompanied by his parents. They all settled into the living room, and Peter's father spoke in a stern tone. We're here to discuss our son's divorce, he began. As the conversation about the divorce unfolded, I took a firm stand. If you don't agree to the divorce, I warned Peter, I'll use my parents' connections at the university to jeopardize your future. It wouldn't be hard to damage the career of a junior registrar if their daughter files a complaint. Peter, who genuinely cared for me, was taken aback by my approach. He felt my tactics were aggressive and intimidating, as if I was trying to force his hand. His father argued vehemently. We could easily contest the divorce, he said. Tiffany, beneath her simple appearance, is manipulative and greedy. Poor Peter. I heard she even paid him to stay away. She must have entertained other men. We should take this to family court and claim Peter was coerced into this divorce. But if Tiffany were to make a genuine apology, maybe things could be different. For instance, if she gave up the car she's been driving, it might help smooth things over. Peter and his parents listened silently, absorbing his father's protests. Just then, the doorbell rang, and my mom answered it. Aunt Lori walked in, appearing behind her. Sorry I'm late, Lori said, joining the discussion. How's it going? Peter's family, who had met Lori only once at my wedding, was taken aback. What are you doing here? Peter's mother objected. It's rude to barge in like this. We're in the middle of something. Lori remained unfazed. You've heard about Peter's divorce, haven't you? How would an outsider like you know about this? Peter's mother challenged. Lori continued. I was informed by my brother earlier. I couldn't miss such an important moment for my dear niece. Peter's mother retorted, "You're probably here to stop the divorce or for money. Are you still going to make accusations after seeing this?" Without missing a beat, Lori pulled out a stack of documents from her bag and laid them out on the table for everyone to see. "I hired a private detective to look into this," she revealed. "It turns out Peter has been cheating on Tiffany with multiple women. He hardly came home because of it, taking advantage of Tiffany's kindness and even asking her for money." The revelation left everyone in stunned silence, and the tone of the meeting shifted dramatically as everyone processed the gravity of Lori's findings. I was deeply immersed in my university research, so when I did make it home, we spent time together sharing meals and going on trips. To the outside world, we appeared like any other married couple. "Say something, Tiffany," Peter pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. "You don't need to defend yourself," his father quickly reassured him. "We'll handle this. It's not your fault." "That's right," Peter's mother added. "These documents from who knows where surely fabricated. Our Peter would never engage in such acts. He's a kind, outstanding son." "Kind to his parents, maybe," Aunt Lori interjected sharply. "But it seems his kindness doesn't extend beyond that." Beneath her calm demeanor, Aunt Lori was resolute. She pulled out a photograph from the stack of documents. "I was at a hotel for a business meeting recently and saw William there with another woman, looking quite cozy. I had the detective look into William as well, and the results were just as I suspected. Do you understand now?" Peter's mother's face went pale as she grabbed the documents and examined them closely. "What is this? William, how long has this been going on? It's all lies, isn't it?" "Kayla, stop looking," William said, trying to snatch the documents from her. But it was too late. Kayla, visibly distraught, confronted William. "You've been cheating on me. The car you wanted so badly was for her, wasn't it?" No matter how much William tried to calm her down, Kayla was inconsolable. She stormed out of the house, tears streaming down her face, with William trailing behind her, desperately trying to explain. In the ensuing chaos, Peter blurted out, "Hey, wait. What about me?" He followed them out, equally confused. The rest of us were left in stunned silence, but Aunt Lori wore a satisfied smile, giving me a knowing wink. It was clear she had anticipated the dramatic turn of events and the revelations that needed to come to light. After the tumultuous events, Aunt Lori shared with me that Peter's parents had eventually divorced. "You won't fall for such a terrible man again," she assured me. "Let's make you even more attractive. I'll teach you everything about grooming and self-care." Despite her busy schedule, Aunt Lori frequently visited, taking me out for meals and shopping trips. During this time, I absorbed a great deal from her, gaining a new perspective on self-care and confidence. A year after the divorce, I made a pivotal decision to attend graduate school. I dedicated myself to my studies and personal development, a period of transformation for me. One day, while at a street intersection, I heard someone call my name. Turning around, I found Peter standing there. "It's been a while. You've changed a lot," he remarked with a hint of surprise in his tone. I barely recognized him at first. To Peter, the woman he once knew as his plain ex-wife had evolved into someone stunningly beautiful and confident. Meanwhile, Peter's life had taken a downturn. Following his parents' public divorce scandal, he had dropped out of graduate school. With his parents, William and Kayla, cutting off financial support due to the chaos he had caused, Peter struggled to pay for tuition and living expenses. The carefree life he once enjoyed was a distant memory. The women who had once shown interest in him had drifted away, and his former glory had vanished almost overnight. As Peter was about to suggest catching up, a man approached us. "Sorry for the wait. Are you a friend of Tiffany's?" he asked. It was Kevin, the man I had recently started seeing. Kevin's arrival was perfectly timed, underscoring the new chapter of my life that Peter was no longer a part of. Nearby, a group of women couldn't help but admire Kevin. "Wow, that guy is handsome. Is he a model?" they commented. Kevin, noticing my brief interaction with Peter, gave him a nod. "He's from my past. It's okay, we're done talking." "Let's go," Kevin said, taking my hand. Peter stood there, stunned, as Kevin confidently led me away. Without giving Peter another thought, Kevin and I walked towards the crosswalk. I kept my gaze straight ahead, focused on the path in front of us and the future that awaited. I didn't look back even once as we left. "I have a girlfriend, so I'm heading home. Do whatever you want with the child." Mike's words cut through the room, followed by the sound of a young woman's laughter. This woman was Mike's affair partner. "Of course you'll be with me," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "There's no need to compare me to such an old woman. Besides, I don't want a baby. They're just noisy and not cute at all with their wrinkled faces." Her callous words were a blow not only to me but to my daughter as well. My body trembled with rage, but I forced myself to take a deep breath and compose my thoughts. "I'm done with both of you," I said, struggling to control my voice. "It's too late for regrets now." Gathering what little strength I had left in my not fully recovered postpartum body, I stood up and fixed Mike with a piercing glare. "Are you really okay with this? You and the child can just disappear, right?" I needed his confirmation, even though I didn't want to talk to him at all. "Yeah, look," Mike said, showing me the divorce papers and the birth certificate he had already signed. "I've prepared everything. Please just fill out and submit the papers." I nodded in agreement. "Understood. Then this is goodbye forever." Tears filled my eyes, but they were tears of relief and joy. Everything was coming to an end. I would never return to this house or to Mike again. My name is Kate, and I'm 32 years old. I work for a foreign company, though I'm currently on parental leave. Despite the official leave, I still handle work from home, so my workload hasn't changed much. My days are busy but fulfilling as I manage housework and work alone without Mike. I never imagined that life without Mike would feel more comfortable. I met Mike at a friend's wedding after-party shortly after breaking up with my previous boyfriend. Feeling lonely, I quickly grew close to Mike and married him just before turning 30. As the saying goes, love is blind. It wasn't until after the wedding that his issues with womanizing and drinking became clear. He would spend 2 to 3 nights a week drinking, even though he insisted it was within his limits. I couldn't accept his infidelity so soon after our wedding. I just wanted to enjoy the sweetness of married life. When I complained, Mike was indifferent. "What are you talking about? Even when we were dating, I went out drinking and to clubs. You knew I loved drinking and that I'm popular with women." Mike is indeed popular with women. He's attentive, kind, and gives luxurious chocolates on birthdays. He listens sincerely to people's problems, whether they're men or women. His phone is constantly buzzing with messages from both genders, and he always retreats to his room to respond. I wish he would at least silence his phone during our time together. People often tell me how enviable my husband is and how happy I must be. Maybe I'm jealous, but I wish he would be kinder to me. His frequent drinking parties grew from a few times a week to almost every weekend. His phone was always filled with invitations, and though less frequent, there were also requests from women. Despite my confrontations and pleas for him to tone it down, he dismissed my concerns, saying the girls at the club were just being playful. His indifference made me almost give up. Even though he was often away, he did help around the house and was kind to me when he was home. This kindness somewhat balanced out my dissatisfaction with his behavior. When I became pregnant, I was excited and wanted to spend more time together. I eagerly told Mike about the baby, but his reaction was less than enthusiastic. "Are you sure it's mine?" he asked, his response far from the joy I expected. I was taken aback by his lack of happiness and the doubt in his voice. "Mike, are you happy? I didn't expect to get pregnant so soon either, but I'm excited about the baby." I tried to mask my unease when I told him no, I didn't mean that. "Of course I'm happy." Mike's response seemed to be an attempt to cover up his earlier comment. He assumed I wouldn't go out or get involved with other men, a notion I found troubling. Despite my doubts, I chose to view his reassurances positively, believing he trusted me to be serious and avoiding further confrontation. In the days that followed, Mike seemed to come to terms with my pregnancy. He became more attentive to my needs and supported me more eagerly with household chores. His help was invaluable, especially as I struggled with morning sickness. However, his nights out and drinking sessions continued unabated. This growing disconnect between us made me feel a rift in our relationship. I had read that women transition to motherhood as soon as they become pregnant, while men only become fathers after the child is born. Perhaps this was true for Mike as well. I optimistically hoped that once the baby arrived, he would naturally reduce his outings and focus more on our family. As my pregnancy progressed, I adjusted to remote work, creating a more comfortable work environment at home. With morning sickness subsiding, I resumed managing both housework and work. However, as my belly grew, my movements slowed, and I found it harder to keep up with everything. Mike used this as an excuse to go out even more frequently, saying he didn't want to burden me at home. Though it was easier for me to choose meals without his input, the situation felt different with a baby on the way. I wanted to have a serious conversation, but I avoided bringing up early marital issues and turned a blind eye to the traces of women's perfume and messages from women on his social media. Perhaps I was just convincing myself that it was harmless fun, trying to stay optimistic that my fun-loving husband would become a devoted father. In retrospect, Mike might have been mocking my lack of suspicion. He could have been messaging his affair partner right in front of me without me noticing. Then one day, the neighbor lady mentioned, "I saw your husband walking with a young woman recently. Do you have a sister-in-law?" I replied, "Yes, my husband has a sister, but she looked very young. I'm on good terms with her, and we often communicate via social media. We exchanged messages just yesterday, and she didn't mention meeting Mike." I realized with a jolt that I don't have any sisters or brothers. Is he cheating on me? I had always thought Mike was simply going out as usual, but a nagging doubt began to surface. What if he was pretending to socialize but was actually seeing another woman? This was the first time I had such suspicions, and I couldn't entirely dismiss the possibility. That night, I made several phone calls, but Mike came home late as usual. Suppressing my urge to question him, I said, "The baby could come any day now. I'd appreciate it if you could spend more time at home." My stomach has been feeling tight lately. I wanted him to be prepared for when labor started and, more importantly, to be there to support me. The thought of Mike, reeking of alcohol, being nearby during such a critical time filled me with embarrassment and distress. Mike responded quietly, "I understand," and went straight to the bathroom. He finished his bath quickly and headed to bed. We didn't get a chance to talk, and I sighed in frustration. Deciding to go to bed myself, I started walking down the corridor to the bedroom when I suddenly felt a warm liquid running down my leg. At first, I didn't understand what was happening, but then I realized my water had broken. I tried to wake Mike, who was deeply asleep from drinking, but he didn't stir. Half crying, I called a taxi and made my way to the hospital alone in the middle of the night. The next morning, I received a message from Mike, but I was too overwhelmed to respond. It wasn't until later that night, after successfully giving birth, that I managed to reply. "Congratulations, you did well. I have a sudden business trip starting tomorrow, so I can't come to see you. Sorry, can you ask your mother for help?" His words left me stunned. There was no trace of joy about the birth of his child, and I had hoped he would at least come to see me, even if it was late. Exhausted from childbirth and disheartened by Mike's response, I tried to find solace in looking at my sleeping daughter. My mother would be arriving soon to visit her newborn grandchild, and I planned to discuss everything with her. 4 days later, after my daughter Lily and I were discharged from the hospital, Mike's messages continued to be casual, likely due to his usual social activities. I asked my mother to pick us up and bring us home. As we arrived at the condominium, the concierge congratulated me on Lily's birth, and it was comforting to hear those words. But as I opened the door to our home, I was startled by the sound of a young woman's voice from inside. I nearly dropped Lily in my arms, and my mother looked just as shocked. Foreseeing a worsening situation, I handed Lily to my mother and asked her to wait at the entrance. With heavy steps, I walked down the hallway and called out, "I'm home." "Mike, what's going on?" "I don't even need to ask," I said, flinging open the bedroom door. Mike and his mistress were taken aback, their shock evident. "Why are you back? You were supposed to be discharged tomorrow," Mike exclaimed, trying to deflect. "What?" I sent numerous messages and called several times. "You turned off your phone and clearly enjoyed yourself," I retorted, the pain of seeing Mike with another woman hitting me hard. I had partly anticipated this scene after the neighbor's comment, but it was still gut-wrenching to witness. Feeling nauseous, I heard Mike speak coldly. "I have a girlfriend, so I'm heading home. Do whatever you want with the child." The young woman's laughter rang out. "Mike, you'll be with me, right?" she said with a dismissive tone. "Of course. There's no need to compare me to such an old woman. Besides, I don't want a baby. They're just noisy and not cute with their wrinkled faces." Her cruel words stung deeply, attacking both me and my baby, Lily. My body trembled with anger, but I took a deep breath to steady myself. "I'm done with both of you. It's too late for regrets now." Summoning all the strength I could muster from my still recovering postpartum body, I glared at Mike. Are you really okay with this? It's fine for me and the child to disappear, right? I asked, needing him to confirm his intentions one last time. Yeah, look, Mike said. I've prepared the divorce papers and the birth certification. I've already signed them. So Kate, please fill them out and submit them. I nodded, responding, understood. Then this is goodbye forever. Tears welled up in my eyes, but they were tears of relief. Everything was finally ending. I would never return to this house or to Mike again. After that, Lily and I temporarily moved in with my mother. She reassured me, saying, consider it a homecoming after the birth. Don't worry about it, allowing me to rely on her comfortably. Financially, I had no concerns. I was receiving a steady paycheck from my company and was in a position to take a proper maternity leave. According to my mother, my father would soon come to visit Lily. My parents typically live in France and only stay in this house when they have business in Japan. Gradually, I was getting used to taking care of Lily and began to physically recover. It was time to proceed with the divorce proceedings. In truth, I had already been preparing for this, moving my belongings out gradually before giving birth. So there wasn't much left to do. I had consulted with a lawyer several times to ensure my position was secure, and I was timing my contact with Mike. When he finally called, his confusion was palpable. What's this? I was told to leave the house, he said. Of course, I responded calmly. That house is property of the company I work for. If I'm not living there, it's only natural for you to leave. I work for a foreign real estate company, Mike said. I didn't know it was your company's property. We looked at several apartments with a real estate agent, but he must not have realized it was connected to your company. I'm sorry I didn't make it clear, I explained. The property is owned by our company, so it was cheaper for me to rent. Normally, the rent for that place would be over $1,300 a month. I heard a surprised gasp from Mike's end. $1,300. That's a lie, he almost screeched. It's no lie, I said. As an employee, I only paid $1,100 a month, including utilities, which was automatically deducted from my paycheck. But now that has stopped. What are you talking about? Came a voice that clearly belonged to his mistress. It seemed she had assumed Mike was covering all the rent and expenses. She must have been shocked to learn that their current lifestyle was dependent on me. Wait a minute, Mike said. If I had to pay that much in rent, my salary won't be enough. That's right, I replied. I forgot to mention that I'm also storing the belongings you left behind. You owe $3,300 for storage. If you don't retrieve them soon, additional charges will apply, and you'll have to keep paying until everything is moved out. I wondered if Mike had always been so petty. I felt a pang of disheartenment. I had only packed clothes and essentials for Lily and me, but I couldn't move all the larger items and furniture. All right, I'll be there soon, I said, and hung up. After explaining the situation to my mother, we decided to head to my previous residence. Though it was inconvenient, my mother and Lily came with me. After contacting the lawyer and coordinating with several parties, we set off from my mother's house. It took us several minutes to reach the old house. I pressed the intercom, and an irritated Mike answered, Already? Come in quickly. When my mother and I entered, the state of the house was appalling. Though I wasn't the best at tidying up, I had cleaned thoroughly in preparation for the baby. In just 1 month, it had deteriorated into a complete mess. Empty beer cans, plastic bottles, takeout containers, and various bags overflowed from the trash can. Despite having a dishwasher, dirty dishes were piled up in the sink. I'm not great at cleaning, but I did my best, I said coldly. Mike's suggestion that I should return was ridiculous. I'm not the one who left. You were told to leave. The lawyer and movers arrived shortly after. Thank you for coming, I said. Movers, please remove most of the appliances. Most of the electronics in this house were purchased by me. Mike only had old items from his student days, which I gradually replaced. Mike panicked as he watched the appliances being removed. What the hell? How am I supposed to live now? The mistress emerged from the back room, yawning and glancing around as if she had just woken up. Actually, most of the things in this house were bought by me, I told her. Mike only covered living expenses. The appliances and other costs were all from my own pocket. In other words, they belong to me. You two will need to buy your own from now on. I smiled at the mistress. The lawyer will explain everything in detail, but I will be claiming alimony from both Mike and you. If I secure custody of our child, there will be no division of assets. I'll leave the balance of our joint account to Mike." Mike and his mistress exchanged a hopeful glance, but their smiles faded as the lawyer began speaking. "I will be claiming $200,000 from Mike and $67,000 from Jane," the lawyer said. "This is in addition to the child support claim. The usage fees for the appliances Kate mentioned will be offset against these claims." Their faces went pale as they listened. I added, "Also, you're behind on rent and utilities, right? Expect an eviction notice soon. Water, electricity, and gas might be cut off too, and of course, you'll need to cover your own moving expenses." The sudden realization of paying alimony and approximately $3,000 in rent and utilities visibly shocked them. They began arguing about who would cover the costs. Shortly after I began suspecting my husband's affair, I hired a detective agency to investigate his actions. It was an incredibly difficult time, especially being pregnant. The shock hit me hard, and I even thought it might have caused my water to break. I didn't have the time or energy to investigate myself, but I couldn't remain passive. During my hospital stay after giving birth, I called the concierge of our apartment building to inquire about Mike. They reluctantly confirmed seeing him return home with another woman several times. Next, I requested my company to review the security camera footage, which clearly showed Mike and the woman entering the elevator together. Additionally, the detective agency had obtained photos of them entering a hotel. Their escape routes were sealed. I was simply waiting for the right moment to confront Mike. When I returned with Lily and saw them blatantly together, I knew it was time to take decisive action. My belongings were being moved out one by one, while Mike and his mistress argued loudly. Lily, my mother, and I sat on the sofa, which was scheduled to be moved out last. Suddenly, the door burst open and a large figure collided with Mike, sending him sprawling across the room. Shocked, we watched as the large man threw Mike across the room again. "What's going on?" Mike shouted as he struggled to get up, only to be met with a loud reprimand from the large man. It was my father, followed by my brother. Both were tall and robust, resembling bears. My biological father had died in an accident shortly after I was born. My mother, who had been involved in the family real estate business, met my current father, a French man, during a business trip to France. They married when I was in middle school. My father, a former football player, is a large and passionate man. Though it took me a while to warm up to him as a child, it was clear he deeply loved my mother, so I wholeheartedly supported their marriage. My half-brother Mark, who usually lives in France, had come with my father. I hadn't seen him since I got married, so this unexpected reunion was a pleasant surprise. Watching my father and brother scold Mike angrily in French was a sight to behold. Mike looked visibly frightened, sweating and pale, though he likely didn't understand the French words being hurled at him. The mistress, attempting to sneak out of the house, was caught by my mother and brought back. Mike tried to speak, but my father and Mark drowned him out with their shouting. Then my in-laws arrived. I had contacted them earlier, and they had been eagerly anticipating meeting Lily. Learning about their son's actions for the first time, they were furious. The joy of meeting their grandchild was overshadowed by their disappointment in Mike's behavior. "Mike, what are you doing?" my father-in-law demanded, pushing Mike's head to the floor. "We were looking forward to meeting our grandchild, and here you are, living with an affair partner. We are so disappointed in you." My mother-in-law looked as though she might collapse from shock. I felt a sense of accomplishment. "Mike, it's okay now. I have Lily, and she gives me hope and a future. Just make sure you pay the alimony and child support. You can stay in this house if you can cover the rent." The shock of discovering the affair had been overwhelming, both mentally and physically, but now things were different. I had a child to protect, and I decided it was time to let go of my hatred and anger. It wasn't something I wanted to show Lily. Having said what I needed to, and with my father and Mark having dealt with Mike, I resolved to move on. Sensing my resolve, my father and Mark supported me as we left the apartment with Lily and my mother. Eventually, I learned that Mike had to move out of the luxury apartment and now lived in a regular one. The mistress left him, apparently only interested in the luxury lifestyle. When Mike asked her to move with him to a more modest apartment, she reportedly said, "If you don't have money, our relationship is over," and left. It seemed her interest had been entirely dependent on his wealth. I received apology letters from her parents, and I told them that as long as the alimony was paid, the matter would be considered closed. Though they expressed their gratitude, I never received a direct apology from the mistress herself. This only reinforced my criticism of the younger generation's attitudes. Mike's behavior at work changed drastically. Once popular and always surrounded by colleagues, he now found himself isolated, with no one approaching him for advice. Even if he were invited out for drinks, his financial obligations for alimony and child support likely left him no room for leisure. Having lived freely and carelessly before, he now had to work diligently to meet his responsibilities. I decided to move to France with Lily. Though staying in Japan at my mother's house would have been fine, my father invited us to France. I can work remotely, and Lily can grow up in a natural and enriching environment, picking up French and experiencing a wide range of opportunities. As for me, I plan to refresh myself physically and mentally at my father's house while carefully considering my future. I look forward to enjoying another day at the park with Lily. The sound of footsteps on the street below felt like daggers piercing my soul. I had always had my grievances with my husband, but never to this extent. The way he could so easily destroy everything important to me. There was no coming back from that. Forgiving him was out of the question. I would make him regret ignoring me, my family, and his selfishness. My name is Jennifer, a 45-year-old housewife. I live in a small flat with my husband. Growing up, I was particularly close to my grandfather, a man I admired deeply. Even though my grandmother had passed, my grandfather remained strong and healthy for his age. We would meet occasionally, and his wisdom was something I cherished. A family must support each other no matter what. It's that support that makes us a family, he'd often say. Those words still echo in my heart. Family is about mutual care, not one-sided sacrifice. I wanted to live by his example, to build a life like his, but life had other plans. Before we got married, my husband seemed like a different man. He helped with chores and acted kind. But as soon as we started living together, he changed completely. I was left to do everything, cleaning, cooking, everything. Don't leave all the housework to me, I would plead with him time and again. His response was always the same. I'm tired from work. It's your job to handle the home. His dismissiveness turned our conversations into arguments. Why are you so selfish? I would ask, desperate for him to understand. But his answer was always the same. That's your role. You're useless as a wife if you can't even do that. The more he belittled me, the more I started to wonder if I was indeed the problem. But I couldn't shake my mother's words from my mind. Even as a stay-at-home wife, you're not supposed to do everything alone. A family works together. I tried to follow her advice, but nothing I said to my husband made any difference. Then the worst news arrived. My grandfather had collapsed and was rushed to the hospital. My mother called to tell me, and I knew I had to be with him. Can you handle things at home while I go visit Grandpa? I asked my husband. His response was as cold as ever. Why should you visit? You're the wife. Your place is at home. His words stung. Grandpa's seriously ill. I need to go, I insisted, but he shrugged it off. Who's going to take care of the house if you leave? I begged him to let me go, but he refused. I felt trapped, helpless. My mother tried to reassure me by taking care of everything, but my heart ached as Grandpa's condition worsened. I thought about visiting in secret, but I didn't have the means to get there. My husband had the car for work. Night after night, I lay awake, fearing I would never see my grandfather again. A month later, he passed away. I never got to say goodbye. At the funeral, seeing his face so frail and thin, I wept harder than anyone else. The sorrow of losing him consumed me, but it was soon followed by another blow, my growing indifference to my husband. Every day, I felt like a shell of myself, empty and disconnected. One day, out of the blue, my husband approached me. There's a place I want to take you. I need you to come with me, he said. For a brief moment, I hoped he was trying to make amends, that maybe he was finally willing to be the kind of partner my grandfather always spoke of. I followed him, clinging to that flicker of hope. We arrived in a quiet residential area. Nothing special about the place, no signs of change or reconciliation. We stopped in front of the house, and he pointed at it. What's this? I asked, confused. This, he said, is our new home. I stared at him in shock. A new home? Where did you get the money for this? He looked at me, completely unfazed. From your grandfather's inheritance. I know about it, even though you tried to hide it. With that much money, of course we can buy a house. I was speechless. I wasn't even allowed to visit my grandfather when he was dying, but my husband was ready to claim his inheritance. The betrayal felt like a knife in my heart. I couldn't comprehend how immoral and heartless his thinking was. He seemed to lack any trace of humanity. When I refused to give him the inheritance, he snapped back, "Your money is my money. Stop saying ridiculous things. Just hand over the money for the house." His selfishness brought tears to my eyes, and I noticed people passing by giving him cold stares as he laughed loudly, oblivious to their judgment. If I had known his true nature, I would have never married him. Why hadn't I seen it sooner? I felt a surge of anger. How could he trample on my feelings so easily? By this point, my love for him had completely vanished. "You seem to misunderstand," I said, trying to stay calm. "But I can't inherit my grandfather's estate." My words caught him off guard, and for a moment his face reflected surprise. But he quickly recovered, smirking as if mocking me. "Don't lie just because you don't want to give me the money. I know your grandfather left it all to you." "Yes, he did," I admitted. "It was written in his will, but I renounced the inheritance. Even if I had accepted it, I wouldn't use his estate for you. I couldn't bear to see my grandfather's legacy wasted on someone like you." His face reddened with fury. "What? You can't just give it up. Go and get it back right now. We won't be able to make the loan payments." "I'm sorry, but I can't do that. I won't hand over my grandfather's estate to someone who only cares about money." My words hit hard, and he lost his composure, shouting, Don't get smart with me." But his anger no longer had any power over me. His threats felt hollow, the desperate rantings of a man who had lost control. I thought back to my grandfather, and it only deepened my resolve. This man, who refused to let me visit my dying grandfather, had no right to the inheritance. Families are meant to support each other, but he showed no such care. He wasn't family anymore, and his fate was no longer my concern. What mattered most was honoring my grandfather's memory, and with that, I felt a sense of peace. "What about the loan?" My husband, realizing I wouldn't back down, looked panicked. "I don't know," I replied coldly. "Solve it yourself." Flustered, he fumbled for his phone. "Hello, Mom," he said, his voice shaky. I soon saw my mother-in-law rushing toward us, her face full of confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between the two of us. I calmly explained, "Your son bought a house without telling me and planned to use my grandfather's inheritance to pay for it. And despite my grandfather being on his deathbed, he refused to let me visit him." My mother-in-law's face turned red with anger as she processed what I said. She glanced at her son, who gave her a sheepish nod in confirmation. "Why would you do that?" she shouted, her voice full of fury. "You didn't even let her see her grandfather, and now you want the inheritance. That's irresponsible." Before anyone could react, she slapped him hard across the face. My husband, clearly shocked by the sudden scolding, began to cry. "I didn't mean it like that," he sobbed, his cries echoing down the quiet residential street. But his mother wasn't done. "Apologize to Jennifer," she demanded, her voice sharp. "You acted like a terrible person." "Mom, please don't scold me so much. I thought I was doing the right thing," he whimpered through his tears. "Learn the difference between right and wrong," she replied sternly. "What you did was completely wrong." "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible as he offered his apology. But it was too late. Any remorse from him meant nothing now. "I'm sorry," my husband apologized again, but by then, I felt like a spectator in my own life. Watching everything unfold, a sense of relief washed over me. "I truly am sorry," he repeated, and even my mother-in-law chimed in. "Jennifer, please forgive us." My husband begged, "Jennifer, help me," but when his mother shot him a harsh glare, he let out a sad, defeated sigh. Seeing the grown man cry like that was pitiful, and as I watched this absurd scene, I finally said what mattered most. "Let's get a divorce." His face, already pale, turned ghostly white. But I apologized. "There are things we can't fix with just an apology. Our values don't align," I continued. "I wish I had realized it sooner." "Don't say that. I'm nothing without you." My husband clung to my feet, desperate. "What about the house? The mortgage? I can't do anything without you." "That's not my problem anymore," I said coldly. "I'm done with you, so give up." He looked devastated, but I had no intention of comforting him. No matter how much he pleaded, my mind was made up. My mother-in-law, seeing me shake my head, said firmly, "If you want a divorce, go ahead. I'll deal with my foolish son." Yes, please, I replied. I never want to see him again. With that, she took him by the arm and led him back to her house. Even as he walked away, he kept shouting, "Help me, Jennifer." But my heart was frozen, unmoved by his cries. The divorce process was swift. My ex-husband resisted at first, but under pressure from his mother, he eventually agreed. Since the divorce was his fault, I was granted alimony for the emotional distress he caused me. He also had to take full responsibility for the mortgage, as the house was in his name. I knew he would struggle with both payments, but that wasn't my concern anymore. Time passed, and I ran into his mother one day. She told me that after the divorce and the crushing weight of the mortgage, my ex-husband stopped going to work. He missed so many days that his company eventually fired him. Now, he works part-time at a construction site, constantly scolded by his mother. She said he doesn't get along with his coworkers and complains daily about wanting to quit. But his mother won't allow it. As for me, I rebuilt my life. I found a new job that welcomed me despite my lack of recent experience. A kind mentor helped me learn the ropes, and I quickly adapted. Now, I'm even in charge of training new employees. My life now is far more fulfilling than during my marriage. I feel confident again, proud of who I've become. Soon, I plan to visit my grandfather's grave. I want to tell him everything that's happened, knowing he's watching over me with a smile from above. From now on, the four of us will live together, my son Ben says with a laugh as he walks in. Come on, let us in quickly, and order something fancy for dinner, he jokes, making demands over the phone. It's a new chapter, and this time, I feel ready for whatever comes next. I was completely astounded by his selfishness. That's impossible. I'm still in the middle of sorting things out at the new house, I exclaimed, my frustration mounting. What new house? Ben's voice was filled with confusion. In the background, I could hear his wife, Kate, sounding furious. You can't always have things your way. My name is Nancy, a 56-year-old homemaker. I've been married to Ken for 30 years. We met at work and got engaged about a year after we started dating. I will always make you happy, so please marry me, he said sincerely, and those words meant the world to me. Even now, 30 years into our marriage, Ken still makes me happy. I'm truly glad to have married him. About a year after our wedding, I became pregnant. It was unexpected but a joyful surprise for both of us. We had always hoped for a child. We named our son Ben. He was an adorable baby, and we cherished him, raising him with all our love. As he grew older and started to speak, our days became even more joyful, filled with his laughter and innocent mischief. Time flew by, and soon Ben was ready to start elementary school. We hoped he would make many friends and excel in his studies. However, things didn't go as smoothly as we hoped. As soon as Ben started school, he began causing trouble. He was always lively and mischievous at home, but his behavior at school seemed out of control. He disrupted classes and made his classmates cry with his selfishness. Every time the school called, I found myself apologizing, and Ken and I would scold Ben, trying to make him understand why his actions were wrong. Unfortunately, he didn't see it that way and felt our scolding was unfair. Nothing seemed to change his behavior. Ben struggled with his studies, unable to concentrate, and his teachers often pointed out his poor grades. We worried about our parenting and tried everything from tutoring to private lessons, but his grades remained poor. In middle school, the issues continued. He frequently disrupted classes and once even injured another child, which led us to apologize to the child's family. Ben was clearly seen as a problematic student at school. Whenever I attended open house or parent-teacher conferences, I noticed that other parents avoided me, making it difficult to make friends. It was a tough time for our family. Despite these challenges, Ben managed to advance to high school. Ken and I hoped he would graduate successfully. We allowed Ben to take up a part-time job, but only on the condition that he continued to study diligently. He often spent his allowance too quickly, so we provided him with only a modest amount, hoping he would learn to manage his finances better. Earning his own money seemed to make him very happy, and he worked almost daily at his part-time job, earning a considerable sum for a high school student. Remarkably, he kept his promise and did not neglect his studies. He worked hard even in subjects he found challenging, and as a result, we no longer received any calls from his school about his behavior. Ken and I were amazed by this sudden change in Ben. However, despite his hard work, Ben spent all his earnings and had no savings. He bought numerous luxury items, and his wallets and bags were more expensive than mine, which shocked me. Eventually, Ben graduated from high school, an achievement that once seemed almost impossible. Moreover, he was offered a full-time position at the grocery store where he had worked part-time for 3 years. His securing a stable job was a great relief for us as his parents. When Ben got the job, he decided he wanted to move out to live independently and freely. Although I felt a pang of sadness at the thought of him leaving home, considering all the effort we had put into raising him, I also understood his desire to spread his wings and find his own path. I also recognized that Ben was now a grown man, and seeing him work hard was a good thing, or so I believed. After Ben moved out, he rarely returned home. We had hoped he would come back at least for Christmas, but he didn't. It was his first year living on his own, so maybe he wanted to enjoy the freedom. Although it was disappointing. Ken and I didn't push him. We assumed that future holidays would just be the two of us. However, as time passed, there were still no signs of Ben returning. He didn't come home during the summer vacation or any other time, and there was no contact from him. Worried about his safety, we tried to reach out. After several attempts, he finally answered the phone. "What? You're being annoying. What do you want?" Ben responded, clearly irritated. "Ben, we were worried about you. You haven't come home or contacted us since you left," I said, feeling both relief and frustration. "You're calling me repeatedly just for that." "I'm fine," he replied dismissively. "It's not just that. We were really worried. Can't you come home at least once a year?" I pleaded. "Fine, I get it. I'm hanging up now," Ben said and quickly ended the call. I wasn't sure if he didn't understand how much parents worry or if he was just being self-centered. Either way, I was relieved to know he was safe, even if it was a small comfort. After that, Ben rarely returned home, and we nearly gave up hope of seeing him again. Then, about 5 years after he had moved out, he suddenly appeared at our doorstep. "Mom, Dad, it's been a while," Ben greeted us casually. "Ben? You're here so suddenly. Is something wrong?" I asked, surprised by his unexpected visit. "Something wrong? Didn't Mom tell me to come back?" he replied. "That's true, but you could have at least informed us beforehand." "Sorry, but you're happy to see me, right?" he said, brushing off my concerns. "Yes, of course. Have you been well? You haven't contacted us at all." "Okay, Dad, no lectures, please. I'm fine. I came today because I have something important to tell you." "Something important?" I asked, feeling a sense of unease. "Actually, I'm getting married," Ben announced, casually dropping the bombshell. "Married?" Ken and I were shocked. "Yeah, relax. I'll bring my fiancée next week. You can meet her," Ben said nonchalantly. "Of course, but getting married so soon. You're only 23, Ben," I said, still trying to process the news. "People get married at this age all the time," he responded confidently. As if his sudden visit wasn't surprising enough, this news left us completely stunned. A week later, Ben returned with his fiancée Kate. She was 21, 2 years younger than Ben, and she fit the image of a modern young woman, flashy and confident. They had met at the grocery store where Ben worked and decided to get married. "Are you sure you want to get married so young?" I asked, feeling concerned. "Well, actually," Kate began, her voice softening, "I'm pregnant. That's why we need to get married." "Pregnant?" I blurted out, caught off guard by yet another revelation. "Didn't I mention it?" Ben asked, clearly having forgotten to tell us about this important detail. "We hadn't heard anything about it," Ken said, looking as shocked as I was. "So, you're getting married because of the pregnancy?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around everything. "Exactly. We want to have the wedding before Kate's belly becomes noticeable," Ben explained. The conversation moved quickly, and we struggled to keep up. Then Ben made a request that floored us even more. "Actually, we need to pay a deposit for the wedding venue soon, and we're a bit short. Can you guys cover it?" "What?" Ken and I were speechless. After all the shocking news, now he was asking for financial help. "We can't just come up with money like that on such short notice," I said, trying to remain calm. "Well, we're in trouble too. We've already invited friends to the wedding," Ben said, visibly upset. "That's putting the cart before the horse," Ken said, frustrated. Ben and Kate looked hurt. "I didn't think my parents would be so heartless. You're okay with us being sad because we can't have our wedding?" Ben said, his voice laced with disappointment. "That's not what we mean, Ben," I said softly. "Then as parents, shouldn't you at least cover the wedding expenses?" Ben asked, his frustration growing. Though it felt unreasonable, we didn't want to ruin their important day. Reluctantly, we agreed to prepay the wedding expenses, draining $113,000 from our savings. It was exhausting, both mentally and physically, but seeing Ben and Kate happy made us accept the situation. The meeting with both families went well, and Ben's wedding was a beautiful ceremony. We were relieved it had gone smoothly. After Kate gave birth, however, a new problem arose. The couple wouldn't let us see our grandchild Mike. When we tried to visit the hospital, Ben told us Kate was too tired and needed rest. That seemed reasonable, so we waited. Months passed, and still, Ben didn't initiate contact. Every time we reached out, we were told it wasn't a good time to meet Mike. We felt uncomfortable with how distant Ben and Kate had become, but they didn't forget to remind us about the birth celebration gift. They never visited, and their home address remained a mystery to us. It wasn't until a year later, during the Christmas holidays, that we finally met Mike. They visited briefly, just for a short talk at the front door, and we got to hold Mike only once. During that brief interaction, they demanded $200 for a Christmas gift. Afterward, as expected, Ben and his family disappeared again. 4 years passed quickly. One day, Ben and Kate suddenly visited our house again. To our surprise, they had another child, now 3 years old, and their older son, Mike, was already 5. He had grown so much that we might not have recognized him on the street. "Why are you here today?" Ken asked, sensing that something was off. I couldn't truly rejoice at seeing our grandchildren's faces after all these years, especially since Ben and Kate had shown up unannounced. After cutting ties with us for so long, I was suspicious of their sudden reappearance. My instincts told me this wasn't good news. Then Ben dropped the bombshell. "We're planning to move in here," Ben announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Are you serious? You mean, live together?" I asked, trying to process the shock. "Yes, I thought Mom and Dad would be happy. You can be with your grandchildren and me every day," Ben said, clearly believing we'd welcome them with open arms. "But why all of a sudden?" I pressed. "Well, we won't have to pay rent, and you two can help with the kids," Ben replied, proudly revealing his motive. It hit me then. After not seeing our grandchildren for 4 years, they now wanted to move in for free childcare and rent. I wasn't having it. "It's the same whether we see them now or not," I said, feeling a growing sense of frustration. Ken nodded in agreement. "Exactly. We've been ignored for years, and now we're only good enough when you need something." Ben was furious. "What are you saying? I'm offering to live together. I was even thinking about taking care of you in the future. Anyway, moving in is a done deal." With that, he stormed out with his family, leaving us stunned. We had raised our son, and part of me felt responsible for how he turned out, but Ben was an adult now. He had his own family, and it wasn't our job to step in anymore. Ken and I firmly decided that we would not live with them. However, Ben and Kate were clearly serious about moving in. A few days later, boxes began arriving at our house, sent by Ben. It seemed they were planning to move in by force. Though the boxes were here, Ben and his family weren't yet. They were likely planning to show up later. Ken and I acted quickly. We changed the locks on the house and called a moving company. Luckily, we owned a condo that we'd bought as an investment, and we decided to move there instead. The movers were available the next morning, so we arranged everything swiftly. We transported some of our things ourselves, while the larger items were handled by professionals. We even contacted a real estate agent to start the process of selling the house. We weren't about to let Ben and Kate bulldoze their way into our lives. The next morning, the movers completed the job, and by the time Ben and his family arrived, we were gone. We had managed to avoid their plans just in time. Later that afternoon, Ben called. "Hey, is something wrong?" "No, the question is, what's going on with you?" I replied calmly. Ben half laughed. "We're coming over today. The 4 of us will be moving in." Without waiting for a response, he hung up. Ken and I were concerned. We continued unpacking in our new home. An hour later, Ben called again, sounding confused. "What's going on? Our boxes are outside, the key doesn't work, and I've been ringing the doorbell. Let us in and get dinner ready or order something fancy for delivery." His entitled demands astounded me. "It's impossible," I replied. "We're unpacking at our new house." "New house?" Ben asked, bewildered. "That's right. We decided not to live with you. You sent your belongings without our consent, so we moved to avoid you." "You moved? You couldn't have found a place so quickly." "We already had another property. If we had told you, you would have insisted on living together. We had our own emergency plan." Ben fell silent for a moment. I could hear Kate shouting in the background. "That house is already sold, so it's pointless to try and live there," I added. Ben sounded utterly defeated. "You always get your way," he muttered before hanging up. Without hesitation, I blocked his number. Unfortunately, our warnings didn't seem to reach Ben. In a shocking move, he and his family broke a window to enter the house, moving in their belongings as if it were theirs. Naturally, we reported them to the real estate agency, and they were promptly arrested. During the arrest, Ben resisted, shouting, "This is my childhood home. What's wrong with staying here?" The police subdued him, and the entire incident was witnessed by neighbors and passers-by. Some even recorded the scene and posted it on social media, spreading the news far and wide. As a result, Ben was fired from his job the very next day. His reputation was ruined, and following his arrest, his life unraveled. I later heard that he and Kate divorced. She took their children and moved back to her parents' home, where she now works full-time. Her parents, furious about the situation, manage her salary to save for the children's education. As for Ben, I don't know what he's doing now, and frankly, I no longer care. Ken and I believe we've done enough for him. From now on, we're focused on living happily together, just the two of us. I recently found out that my husband Terry purchased a high-rise condominium right across from the train station. Out of nowhere, he brought up this unexpected topic. I knew he had been considering it, but I had no idea he'd actually gone through with it. The view from the condo is breathtaking, and everything inside is spotless. But here's where it gets strange. I was completely in the dark about it. Can you believe he secretly bought a luxury condo while I was away visiting my parents? I couldn't wrap my head around it. Where did he even get the money? Then, as if it was nothing, Terry casually mentioned that he used the money from selling our previous place to make the down payment. He went on to tell me that he'd be moving in with his parents, without me. I stood there, stunned, as he calmly asked me to leave. I was so taken aback that I couldn't even respond. My name is Carol, and I'm 31, currently 8 months pregnant. Each day, I get more excited about the arrival of our baby, though I'm nervous about giving birth for the first time. My husband Terry is 2 years older than me at 33. He works at a well-known company, and we've been married for 4 years. After facing challenges with conception, I was overjoyed when we finally got pregnant. But now, this shock about the condo has left me unsure of what's happening. To calm my nerves, I've been spending more time at my in-laws' house. On one visit, Terry's sister-in-law, Madison, asked, "Carol, you're about to become a mom soon. How do you feel about it?" "To be honest, it doesn't feel quite real yet," I told her. Madison, who's married to Terry's older brother, is one of the reasons I enjoy visiting. While I don't interact much with my brother-in-law, Madison and I have grown close. She's a housewife like me and lives with my in-laws. 2 years ago, my mother-in-law's mobility started to decline, and Madison stepped in to care for her since she has experience as a caregiver. My mother-in-law mainly uses a cane to get around and does fine on her own most of the time, but Madison still helps out a lot. I've been so impressed by how easily she took on that responsibility without hesitation. Madison and her husband have a 4-year-old daughter, and watching her as a mother has eased some of my anxieties about pregnancy and childbirth. I often find myself looking to her for advice as my due date approaches. With just a month left until my baby is due, I decided to visit my parents to prepare for the birth. Despite the heaviness in my belly, I enjoyed shopping for baby clothes and daydreaming about our future. It was refreshing to spend time at my parents' house after so long. But then, 3 days past my due date, the contractions began. I tried reaching out to my husband, but he was completely unreachable. No calls, no texts, nothing. At first, I was worried that he might be caught up at work or in some sort of trouble. But as my labor pains grew stronger, I didn't have time to wonder where he was. The only thing on my mind was bringing our baby into the world. Eventually, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The moment I held her in my arms, the indescribable joy I felt washed over me, making everything else seem distant. But the fact remained. My husband, who had promised to be by my side, missed the birth. Exhausted from the delivery, I didn't have the energy to confront him right away. Instead, I sent him a brief text announcing the arrival of our daughter and then drifted into a deep sleep. When I woke up, I heard someone calling my name. "Are you still asleep?" "Terry, is it morning already?" I mumbled, opening my eyes to find my husband and his parents standing there. Despite my clear request for privacy after the birth, here they were. "Why didn't you come yesterday?" I asked, my frustration evident. He shrugged off the question, avoiding a direct answer, and casually replied, "It couldn't be helped." His tone was light, as if his absence and the sudden appearance of his parents were trivial matters. I was left grappling with a whirlwind of emotions, from the pure joy of holding my newborn daughter to the bitter disappointment in my husband. When I needed him the most, he chose to go out for sushi with his parents. He justified it by saying it was a prior commitment, and afterward, he didn't come to the hospital because he'd had a few drinks and thought he'd be more of a nuisance than a help. The knowledge that he had been enjoying a meal while I was going through labor was disheartening. And now, here he was, oblivious to my hurt, asking casually, "So, where's our baby?" I told him our baby was in the nursery, a healthy baby girl. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law grimaced and muttered, "A girl? What a useless wife," shocking me with her harsh words. My father-in-law joined in, shaking his head in disappointment, calling both Madison and me pathetic. I was stunned. Instead of receiving any gratitude for enduring childbirth, I was met with criticism. Even Terry wasn't pleased. "Damn it, I knew it was a girl, but I was hoping for a boy," he said, echoing his parents' obvious disappointment. Their frustration over not having a grandson was palpable, especially since Madison's first child had also been a girl. But to me, none of that mattered. Our daughter was precious no matter her gender. As I sat there, overwhelmed and hurt, Terry chose to side with his parents, deepening my dismay. I was seething inside, but the physical and emotional exhaustion from childbirth left me too drained to confront them. Thankfully, a nurse overheard our conversation and intervened, asking them to leave. At last, I had some much-needed peace. Since then, Terry hadn't visited us again at the hospital. When it came time for our discharge, I didn't even bother calling him. Instead, I asked my parents to pick us up and take us to their home. The thought of returning to a house filled with tension and disappointment was unbearable. As I sat at my parents' place, holding my baby, I couldn't help but reflect on the changes in Terry. He used to be so caring when we first got married. I suspected that his transformation had something to do with the significant mistake he made at work 2 years ago, a mistake that caused his company a major financial loss. Although his colleagues managed to soften the blow, sparing him direct consequences, his career took a serious hit. No matter how hard he worked afterward, he couldn't regain his previous standing. Since then, I noticed Terry becoming more detached and colder, both at work and at home. Adding insult to injury, one of his juniors at the company, who had once been less competent than him, was now his boss. This reversal of roles seemed to weigh heavily on him, fueling his irritability and distance. Even as I grew more dissatisfied with his behavior, I had hoped that the birth of our baby might inspire a change in him. But as the days passed and he didn't even try, my worry for our family's future deepened. Out of the blue, Terry finally called me. "Hey, when are you coming back? You've been at your parents' for nearly a month since the baby was born," he said, his tone flat. I wasn't ready to return home, not with everything unresolved, but I found myself replying, "Sorry. I'm coming home soon. It's time to start fresh and pull it together for our daughter," I said, trying to focus on what mattered. I asked Terry if he could help me bring back the baby items. His response left me speechless. "You don't have to bring all that stuff back. I have something else to talk about. Maybe I should have told you over the phone," he said, his tone unsettling. Confused, I pressed him for clarity. That's when he dropped another bombshell. "I bought a high-rise condo right in front of the station." I was stunned. "What do you mean? Why are you bringing this up now?" He rambled on about the condo's spectacular view and how clean and modern it was, but my mind was stuck on the fact that he had moved out of our apartment while I was away. "Where did the money come from? You can't afford a place like that on your salary," I exclaimed, panic rising. Casually, as if it was nothing, he replied, "I made the down payment by selling our house." The ground beneath me seemed to disappear. "What? You sold our house? Where are your parents living now?" I asked, my voice shaking. His excitement was apparent. "Daddy and Mommy are living with me in the condo. I'm going to live with them now, in this great new place, so I don't need a parasite like you around." I was floored. He was moving in with his parents, without my knowledge or consent, and now he was effectively kicking me out. I couldn't find the words to respond. He started referring to his parents in childish terms, boasting about their new life together in the condo. Adding insult to injury, he sneered, You're cocky for just a housewife. You're useless without my salary. Besides, you've done nothing but laze around these days." His words hit like daggers. I stood there, reeling, questioning not only his love but how I had ended up married to someone so heartless. During my pregnancy, when I struggled with severe morning sickness and preparations for our child, he'd shown no sympathy. After the baby was born, he had coldly remarked that I was useless for having a girl. Worse still, he claimed his parents thought it would be better for him to be with a younger woman who could give him a son. He continued, explaining that his parents no longer wanted to live with my brother and his wife, indicating there was already family tension. As if that wasn't enough, he told me he had packed all my belongings and stored them in a unit, instructing me to collect them soon. The conversation turned even more brutal when he said, without emotion, "I've sent you divorce papers. I expect you to file them promptly." Then, without waiting for any response, he hung up. I sat there, stunned, the phone still in my hand. How had it come to this? I was married to a man who had turned into someone unrecognizable, someone cold and cruel. I felt regret, but more than that, I was left questioning everything I thought I knew. I knew I had to pull myself together for the sake of our daughter. After taking time to reflect, I resolved to sever ties with him and start fresh. I wasn't going to let him control my life anymore. Divorce? Bring it on. I was determined to show him he'd regret this more than I ever would. When I explained the situation to my parents, they were furious. They immediately supported me in taking legal action. As soon as I received the divorce papers, I signed and filed them. Half a month later, my husband unexpectedly showed up at my parents' house, fuming. He stormed in, slamming his bank book on the table. "What's this? Why is there a huge withdrawal from my account?" he demanded angrily. I remained calm and met his gaze. "Haven't you heard of the division of property? That's what this is. The account is in my name, and I'm not giving you a cent." His eyes widened in shock. "You couldn't have made that much money," he snapped. "Remember, your salary dropped because of your mistake at work, and now you think you can claim this money." I didn't flinch. "I've been working from home, and I've managed to match your salary. And since you're the one who wanted a divorce, we're dividing the assets." He stared at me, dumbfounded. "You've got to be kidding." That's when my father, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "If you want to dispute this, we'll settle it in court. How dare you treat my daughter this way?" The room was tense. This had escalated beyond personal grievances. It was now a matter of legal and financial justice. I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine and to protect my daughter's future. I wasn't backing down. I deeply regret that my daughter had to experience such turmoil because of Terry. One day, when he tried to confront us again, my father, who is a police officer, gave him a stern look that scared him off. Terry quickly left, and that was the moment I finally severed ties with him for good. We also resolved the division of assets. Since then, I've been living with my parents, focusing on raising my daughter. Parenting has become more familiar, and my daughter's adorable nature makes each day joyful. Life has been good, filled with the kind of happiness only a child can bring. A few months into our new life, I started receiving persistent calls from an unknown number. At first, I ignored them, thinking they might be work-related, but the caller wouldn't give up. Eventually, I answered, and to my surprise, it was Terry. "Hello, Carol," he said hesitantly. "What do you want?" I asked, skipping the small talk. "I'm having trouble paying the mortgage for the condo, and I might get kicked out soon," he confessed. "Oh, so you're short on cash?" I replied, without much sympathy. "Yes, I've used up all my savings. Dad injured his back and had to quit his job, and Mom's been spending recklessly, bragging to her friends about living in the condo," he explained, his voice filled with desperation. I wasn't surprised. Terry had never been good with managing money, and without his father's income and his mother's lavish spending, it was no shock he couldn't keep up with the condo's expenses. "My bank account is empty, and I've been told I need to leave if I can't pay by next week. Please, Carol, come back. We loved each other once," he pleaded. I let out a brief laugh before responding calmly, "Give me a break. You just want to use me when it's convenient for you. You think I'll come back, not for love, but for my salary and to do all the housework, right?" There was a pause. "Also, remember when you called me a parasite? Wouldn't I just be in the way now?" He tried to backtrack, but it was too late. I just chose the wrong words back then. I pressed on, asking, "What about Madison and your brother? Are they still living with your parents?" He sighed. They moved out and are living on their own now. They had a big argument with our parents. My brother wanted Dad to be more sensible, but that only made things worse. Terry's situation seemed dire, but it was a result of his own choices, a tangled mess of financial and familial errors. It was clear he was looking for an easy way out by trying to pull me back into his life. However, I had moved on, focused on building a healthier future for myself and my daughter, free from the chaos of my past with him. Then I heard that my brother-in-law had finally had enough. He stormed out after telling their parents he'd cut ties with them if they continued to disrespect his wife, Madison. It was heartening to know he stood up for her. He seemed like a decent guy. As for Terry, his plea for me to return was met with disbelief. Come back to you. Are you serious? I'm already overwhelmed just taking care of our daughter. I don't have the energy to deal with people like you. I couldn't help but comment on how odd it was for him to still call his parents daddy and mommy. It didn't seem appropriate for someone his age. He tried to backtrack, suggesting I bring our daughter over to live with them. Weren't you planning to live with her when you first asked me to come back? I questioned, catching him off guard. I would never let my daughter live with such a despicable father. Don't ever call me again. If you show up, I'll have my dad arrest you, I warned. His response was a feeble sound, likely recalling my father's intimidating presence. I hung up and blocked his number. Not long after, he tried to reach me with a new number, but I changed mine to cut him off completely. Later, I reconnected with Madison, who reached out to apologize for her silence. She explained that they had moved to the countryside and struggled to set up the internet. Madison and her family now lived in a tranquil rural area and invited me over. When I visited for the first time, I was charmed by the serene surroundings, an ideal place for a child to grow up. During my visit, my brother-in-law shared that Terry and his parents had been evicted from their condo due to unpaid debts and were now struggling financially, a stark contrast to their previous lifestyle. It felt a bit like poetic justice. Meanwhile, I had been working from home and living comfortably at my parents' house. The flexibility of my job allowed me to work from anywhere, so I spent a few relaxing days at Madison's home. I considered the possibility of moving closer to her in the future, hopeful for what lay ahead for my daughter and me. Reflecting on the whole ordeal, buying a high-rise condo on a whim while your wife is pregnant seems absurd, unless you're quite wealthy. It's strange to take such a risk on a normal income. In any case, I felt relieved to be rid of such an unsavory husband. I hope to continue enjoying my peaceful life, possibly relocating near Madison and her family, where everyone got along and fostered a happy environment for my daughter. Hello, I'm Jenna. Before we dive into today's story, if you enjoy real-life dramas and want to hear more, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's jump right in. Our story unfolds in the vibrant heart of a busy town, where David and I had invested everything into creating not just a house, but our dream home. On a sunny Saturday morning, the kids were scattered across the living room, their laughter filling the air as the aroma of pancakes drifted from the kitchen. David, could you lend me a hand with the syrup? I called out while flipping the final pancake. David entered with a warm smile, saying, Absolutely, love. You've really outdone yourself with breakfast this time. As we gathered around the table, the morning sun bathed the kitchen counter, illuminating the faces of our 4 wonderful kids. Our home was a true sanctuary, each room reflecting our journey together. From the hand-painted murals in the kids' rooms to the cozy reading nook by the fireplace where David and I often relaxed, every detail was imbued with love and care. Later that day, while the kids were playing outside, my phone rang. It was Samantha, my sister-in-law, and her voice trembled with distress. Hey Jenna, I'm in a tough spot. After the divorce, we got the house and the kids, and I'm left with nowhere to go. My heart ached for her. Samantha and her children had already endured so much. I'm so sorry to hear that, Sam. Why don't you and the kids come over tonight? We can talk it through and figure something out. Thanks, Jenna. I really appreciate it, Samantha said, her voice carrying a hint of hope. That evening, as David and I readied the guest room, I couldn't shake my worry. Samantha's predicament was serious, and while I knew we needed to help, I couldn't ignore the nagging concerns about what this might mean for us. When they arrived, the house buzzed with energy as the kids eagerly greeted their cousins, filling the space with joyful noise and chaos. Samantha, though visibly exhausted, managed a weary smile. It's so good to see you all. Thank you for having us. Of course, Sam. Let's sit down after dinner and sort everything out, David said, guiding everyone into the dining room. The meal was filled with light conversation, though the underlying tension was unmistakable. After the kids settled in with a movie, the adults gathered in the living room. Samantha took a deep breath, preparing to share her burdens. I don't know how to say this, but I need more than just a temporary place to stay. The kids and I need a home, Samantha said, her voice heavy with desperation. Her words lingered in the air, carrying a weight of urgency. David gently squeezed my hand under the blanket, his eyes reflecting concern. We knew our home was a cherished sanctuary, but it was hard to turn away family in need. We'll find a solution, Sam. For now, you and the kids can stay in the playroom and guest room as long as you need, I said, hoping to offer some solace. Samantha's face fell, her disappointment evident. I was hoping you might consider something more permanent. David and I exchanged a meaningful look, the weight of Samantha's request settling heavily between us. Our home had been carefully crafted for our children's future, every detail meticulously planned and built with them in mind. Let's discuss this with everyone and see if there's a way to help without disrupting our plans too much, David suggested, his peacemaking nature evident. Samantha nodded in agreement, though her eyes betrayed her anxiety about the uncertain future. As they departed later that night, the house felt unusually cold, the silence punctuated by the echo of looming decisions. That evening, as David and I lay in bed with the moon casting shadows across the room, we were acutely aware that our lives were on the brink of change. The question lingered: how much were we willing to sacrifice? Our dream, built on years of love and hard work, was at risk, but so was the well-being of family. The upcoming family meeting would be pivotal, potentially tipping the balance in one direction or another. The following Tuesday evening was circled on our calendar, not for a cheerful family event, but for a meeting that felt more like a tribunal. As David and I drove to my mother-in-law Martha's house, the tension in the car was palpable. No matter what happens tonight, we face it together, right? David said, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. Absolutely, I answered, though I struggled to conceal the tight knot of anxiety in my stomach. When we arrived at Martha's, the usual warmth and cheer were replaced by an uneasy silence. We were led into the living room, where the entire family was already assembled, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Martha took center stage, her tone somber and serious. Thank you all for being here. We're gathered because, as a family, it's important that we support each other during times of crisis. Martha paused, her eyes briefly resting on Samantha, who was sitting with a tissue in hand, her eyes red and swollen. Samantha and her children are facing the threat of homelessness, and it's only right that those of us who are able should step up, Martha continued, her gaze fixed firmly on David and me. I felt David's hand tighten around mine beneath the table. Martha, we understand the gravity of the situation and we empathize, David said, his voice calm and measured. We've already extended an offer for Samantha to stay in our playroom and guest room on a temporary basis. Martha's lips pressed into a tight line. That's a good start, but it doesn't fully address the issue. Jenna, David, your home is quite spacious, much more than you actually need. It would make sense for Samantha and her children to move into your place. You could easily find a new location to build another home. I was taken aback by her boldness. Martha, our home isn't merely a structure. It represents the foundation for our children's future. Every part of it holds love and cherished memories. We can't just give it up and start anew, I replied, my voice thick with emotion. But think about the kids, Samantha added, her voice trembling. Where will my children go if not with family? The room erupted into a flurry of opinions, with some relatives nodding in agreement with Samantha while others shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. David rose to his feet, his commanding presence quieting the room. This isn't just about bricks and mortar, it's about our children's stability. We've invested so much into building our home, not just for ourselves, but as a legacy for our kids. We cannot and will not jeopardize their sense of security. Our offer remains. Samantha can stay with us temporarily, but our home is not up for negotiation. Martha's expression hardened with frustration. David, sometimes sacrifices are necessary for the greater good of the family. Offering temporary refuge is our way of making those sacrifices. I firmly stated, asking us to give up our home isn't a sacrifice, it's an imposition. The room's tension reached a boiling point as Martha leaned forward. You're being selfish. Think about your nieces and nephews. David's resolve remained unshaken. Being a good uncle doesn't mean giving away our children's home. We need to find a better solution. The meeting ended with no resolution, leaving the family divide deeper than before. As David and I walked to our car, the weight of the evening's accusations was heavy between us. Yet amidst the tension, we felt a strong sense of pride in our unity and determination. We had stood our ground, not just for the physical structure of our home, but for the sanctuary it represented for our family. As we drove back home, the lights of our house greeted us warmly in the darkness. It was more than just a building. It was a testament to our love and commitment, a home we were determined to protect, no matter the pressure from those who were meant to support us the most. The days after the family meeting were among the toughest we'd ever face. The phone rang incessantly, each call bringing another family member's blame or plea for us to reconsider. Our decision had triggered a wave of tension that spread through the family like wildfire. Text messages accumulated, each one more pleading or accusatory than the last. "You're turning your back on family in their time of need," one message read. Another was more direct. "How can you be so cold?" The barrage was unrelenting, and with every message, the sanctuary that our home had always provided seemed to shrink under the weight of the family's disapproval. The impact of the situation extended beyond David and me. It started to affect our kids as well. One day, our oldest, Ella, came home from school with a puzzled expression. "Mom, why did Aunt Carol say we have too many rooms and should share with Cousin Lily?" she asked, clearly struggling to make sense of the adult conversations she had overheard. I knelt down and gently took her hands in mine. "Sometimes adults think that sharing is the solution to problems, sweetie, but Dad and I believe that it's important for our home to remain stable and safe for you and your siblings," I explained, hoping to shield her from the ongoing family drama. As the days stretched into a week, a call from a friend offered an unexpected ray of hope. Rachel, a fellow PTA member and a real estate agent, had heard about Samantha's predicament through mutual acquaintances. "I'm not sure if you're aware, Jenna, but there are several rental homes in your area that Samantha could afford with her child support and alimony. I'd be happy to help her find one," she suggested during a coffee chat one afternoon. The suggestion was a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. "That's really helpful, Rachel. Thank you," I replied, my mind racing. Why hadn't Samantha or Martha considered these alternatives? Were they so focused on our home that they overlooked other viable options? Fueled by this new information, David and I decided to investigate further. A few discreet calls confirmed Rachel's claims. There were indeed suitable rental properties available that would allow Samantha to live independently without displacing anyone. This revelation was a mixed blessing. On one hand, it provided a potential way out of the constant pressure. On the other, it reinforced the suspicion that Martha and Samantha's emotional appeals might have been more about convenience than genuine need. With this knowledge in hand, we prepared for the upcoming family gathering, a birthday party for David's cousin. We anticipated a charged atmosphere but felt reassured knowing we had a solid alternative solution to present. As we arrived at the party, the cold reception was unmistakable. Whispers hushed as we passed by, and some family members visibly turned away. The divide was evident, those who supported our decision to safeguard our home versus those who had been swayed by Martha's portrayal of our supposed selfishness. Amid the forced smiles and awkward silences, David squeezed my hand. "No matter what, we have the truth on our side," he whispered, bolstering my resolve to face the family. We were prepared to share what we had discovered and hopeful to bridge the gaps, not through sacrifice, but by fostering understanding and respecting each family member's autonomy. The pivotal moment arrived unexpectedly, a revelation that shifted the course of our family dilemma. One quiet evening, while sifting through our usual influx of emails, I noticed a new listing in a local community bulletin. It was an advertisement for a reasonably priced 4-bedroom rental house, well within Samantha's budget. This discovery was the breakthrough we needed to counter the claim that there were no other viable options for her. Armed with this information, David and I realized it was time to address the family with concrete facts rather than emotions. We decided to present our findings at Grander Ralph's upcoming anniversary celebration, where the entire family would be gathered. It would be our opportunity to clarify the situation and, hopefully, repair some of the rifts that had developed. On the day of the anniversary, the family atmosphere was thick with unspoken tensions as everyone arrived. Despite the festive decorations and the celebratory mood, the recent conflicts lingered in the air. After the meal, As the laughter subsided and conversations grew more personal, David and I sensed that it was our chance to address the issue. I stood up and cleared my throat, drawing the room's attention. I want to thank everyone for coming together today. We need to address an important matter: Samantha's housing situation. The room fell silent, all eyes focusing on us. We all want what's best for Samantha and her kids. Recently, we discovered several affordable housing options that hadn't been considered. David passed around a tablet displaying the rental listings, which circulated through the family. Each member stopped to review the details, which clearly showed that Samantha had viable alternatives to moving into our home. "Why wasn't this mentioned earlier?" Uncle Joe asked, directing his question at Samantha, who looked visibly surprised. I didn't know these options were available," Samantha replied, her voice faltering. David took the floor, his tone both firm and empathetic. "It's evident that there are other solutions we haven't fully explored. We need to investigate these options thoroughly." The challenge to the prevailing narrative was clear as family members absorbed the new information. The earlier accusations against us started to lose their impact. I added, "We've been painted as unsympathetic, but that was never our intention. We offered temporary shelter, and now we're presenting a long-term solution that doesn't disrupt our children's lives." Martha, clearly uncomfortable, finally spoke up. "I suppose we may have jumped to conclusions. It's important that we make decisions based on complete information," I responded, aiming to bridge the gap created by earlier demands. The focus of the conversation shifted from blame to finding solutions. Family members began discussing how they could help Samantha move into one of the listed homes. The tension that had clouded the gathering started to dissolve, replaced by a more cooperative atmosphere. As the party came to a close, a sense of collective relief emerged. Apologies and constructive suggestions flowed, particularly from those who had been most critical. Before leaving, Martha approached us with a softer expression. "I'm sorry for the pressure we put on you. It seems there were better options all along." Driving home, David and I felt a profound sense of relief. Our decision not only safeguarded our home but also helped steer the family towards a more supportive and understanding dynamic. The house, once a battleground, was again a sanctuary. As we tucked our kids into bed that night, the peace we felt was all the sweeter for the trials we had faced. In the weeks following Grandma Ruth's anniversary party, the family dynamic shifted subtly yet significantly. The fallout from the revelation of alternative housing options had cooled the intense demands and sparked a realization among those who had been quickest to judge. Martha, in particular, faced the uncomfortable truth that her actions had been based more on assumptions than on facts. At family gatherings, she often kept to herself or offered conciliatory gestures toward David and me, her discomfort evident. Support came from unexpected places. Aunt Mary and Uncle Joe, who had been quiet throughout the ordeal, reached out to commend David and me for how we managed the situation. "Jenna, you really showed us what it means to stand firm with grace," Aunt Mary said one afternoon. Their newfound support was a welcome relief, soothing some of the wounds left by the conflict. Meanwhile, Samantha found a suitable home from the listings Rachel had provided and moved in with her children soon after. The community rallied around her, helping her settle in and transforming what could have been a lingering issue into a powerful example of communal support and cooperation. At home, the sense of peace was almost tangible. David and I often found ourselves savoring the quiet after the kids were tucked in, enjoying the calm that had replaced the earlier tension. Our house, once the epicenter of family conflict, had reverted to being our beloved sanctuary. Watching our children play in the backyard, their laughter carried on the evening breeze, filled me with a profound sense of pride and relief. We had weathered the storm, safeguarded our home, and emerged stronger. Our home was no longer just a physical space but a symbol of our love, resilience, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it means standing against family. Now that our story has come to a close, I'd love to hear from you. Would you have made the same choices if you were in our shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Since I'm getting remarried, you'll need to move out. The $55,000 loan will be covered by my new partner, he said, his voice dripping with irony. Years of painstakingly working to pay off that loan left me stunned by his audacity to shift the burden onto his new wife. "Then, I guess the $5,000 monthly payments will be your responsibility now," I replied, making clear the true amount I had been shouldering all along. "Sign the divorce papers without delay," I continued, and just leave. Whatever comes next, even if it's hell, doesn't matter to me anymore. I'm Meg Smith, a 41-year-old housewife who works part-time. My husband Mike is 3 years older than me, and we've been married for 10 years. We first met while working at the same company. Back then, I was deeply engrossed in my career and had little interest in marriage or romance. However, after turning 30, a colleague who was contemplating going independent persuaded me to switch jobs. Just as I was starting to settle into my new role, Mike, a senior colleague from my old company, confessed his love for me. From the start, my relationship with Mike, who was in his mid-30s, was viewed through the lens of marriage. However, 2 years later, we tied the knot, largely due to pressure from those around us. My in-laws were incredibly supportive, treating me like their own daughter, which allowed me to continue working without concerns. A year after our marriage, we built a house that reflected our dreams and desires. Although it was a significant investment, we secured a loan with a manageable repayment plan. This major purchase solidified our commitment to supporting each other. For the first 2 years, we lived as a typical working couple. However, in our 3rd year of marriage, as we began contemplating starting a family, Mike dropped the bombshell that he wanted to leave his job to start his own business. He had always dreamed of launching his business before turning 40 and had been quietly building his network and saving money. While the future of his venture was uncertain, his resolve was unwavering. By the time I discovered his plans, he had already resigned from his job. I felt disheartened by the lack of communication between us, especially since he seemed to assume that my income alone would cover our needs. Shortly after Mike launched his business, my father-in-law fell ill and was hospitalized. It became clear that returning to his previous lifestyle was no longer feasible, and his home would need extensive renovations for his post-discharge needs. Although my in-laws insisted they could manage on their own, Mike decided that our family would cover all the expenses. I wanted to support my in-laws as much as possible, so I agreed to help, but covering the entire cost was a different story. Our household expenses surged, and I was left bewildered. Our income simply couldn't sustain such a large financial burden. Mike's business was struggling, with frequent contract cancellations and few new opportunities. His income had dwindled to nearly nothing, and I was left to handle all living expenses and loan payments with my salary. Despite being nearly unemployed, Mike remained indifferent to our financial strain, dismissing my concerns and treating the situation as if it were someone else's problem. Our credit card bills began to soar as Mike frequently went out drinking, claiming it was for client relations. Faced with the possibility of spending our lives just paying off loans, I suggested we either sell the house or shut down the struggling business. Mike dismissed my proposals, insisting, "We're not on the brink of ruin. This is a time to endure." The only reason we were managing it all was because of my salary, and I was the one bearing the brunt of our financial strain. Mike couldn't grasp this reality. Eventually, I felt it was pointless to discuss anything with him as long as payments were made on time. As the situation dragged on, our daily conversations dwindled. I knew Mike was spending time with other women under the guise of work, but I had become indifferent to him. One day, after returning from work, Mike finally spoke to me after a long silence. With a smirk, he waved a piece of paper in front of me and said, "I've decided to divorce you. Please sign here." I took a deep breath and responded calmly, accepting both his words and the divorce papers. It was likely because I had been contemplating proposing a divorce myself if he hadn't acted first. "Can we wait a moment? I just got home. Let's discuss this in the living room," I suggested. "I thought you wanted to talk, but now you're rushing me," he asked, his tone irritated. "I don't need any unnecessary conversation, just get it over with," he snapped back. Deliberately took my time moving to the living room, sensing Mike's growing impatience. I resented how everything was unfolding on his terms and decided to prolong the moment a bit longer. Regardless, the decision to divorce was made. The days we had spent together in the house we built with so much care were coming to an end. I wanted to savor these final moments at my own pace. As I settled on the sofa, I picked up the divorce papers once more. They seemed flimsy compared to the marriage registration we had signed a decade ago, possibly reflecting my current state of mind. "How long are you going to just stare at them?" Mike asked, his tone edged with irritation. "I have a question. What are your plans after the divorce?" "What do you mean? What am I going to do? Are you saying you're having second thoughts about the divorce?" I'm going through with the divorce, but can we at least have a brief conversation before it's finalized? I'm planning to remarry, after all. Remarrying, huh? So there's someone else. She must be young, attractive, and financially successful, unlike me, an old lady who didn't even have children with you. So you're planning to take advantage of her next. Take advantage of her? What do you think of me? I'm simply laying out the facts. I've always handled the finances and you never had to worry about payments. Yet you act so superior. I can lead a better life without someone like you. The divorce is actually a favor for me. Sure. I'll brush off your bitter remarks as the ramblings of someone who's lost. Maybe I should have said more. Keep talking. The divorce is final, and I won't have to see your face much longer. So please move out by the end of the week. I'm leaving today. I can't stand hearing your voice any longer. By the way, does your new girlfriend know about the loans you're carrying? Of course she does. She's agreed to contribute $500 a month for living here. It's no big deal for her. She won't struggle with the loan payments like you did. Understood. After signing the divorce papers, I decided to leave with my belongings already packed. I'll leave the remaining furniture behind as part of the asset division. Dispose of it if you don't need it. Just go. And best wishes to your new girlfriend. Handling a $5,000 monthly loan payment will be challenging, but good luck. By the way, I've left a note detailing the loan information for her. With a smile, I handed Mike the note, got into my car, and drove away from my former home. I headed straight to City Hall to submit the divorce papers. I hadn't felt this relieved in a long time and thought I should have divorced sooner without worrying about him managing the loan payments. A week after the divorce, one morning, I received multiple calls from my ex-husband Mike. Though I had anticipated this, it was still quite irritating. I decided to address it and answered one of his calls. Yes, what do you want? I wouldn't be calling if it weren't important. That's quite rude, but is it true about the $5,000? I have no reason to lie. You're expecting me to cover your debt. I sighed deeply at his words. Maybe I should have explained everything more clearly instead of just relying on the note. Despite the inconvenience, all the details are laid out in that note. I thought you'd understand it if you read it. I'm calling because I still don't get it, even after reading. I'll break it down for you. Besides the mortgage on the house, there are the renovation costs for your parents' home that you chose, the personal loan for your father's medical expenses, the business loan for your venture, and the credit card debt you accrued, all under your name. If there were only a mortgage, I could have managed that, but there's much more. If you have doubts, you can verify it. I helped because I was your wife, but now that we're not, it's no longer my concern. I told you when I left that there's a monthly payment of $5,000. You must think this is a joke. You spent money like it was nothing. Did you ever consider these payments? Well, you'll have to deal with it with your new girlfriend. That's why you divorced me, right? Actually, she broke up with me. She said $5,000 a month is too much. I figured as much. It's understandable. Even someone with a high income would rarely agree to take on a $5,000 monthly payment for debts they didn't incur. No one wants to pay 10 times the value of a house over many years. Did you really earn that much after changing jobs? Yes, my salary increased fivefold after changing jobs, but all that income went straight to repayments. I didn't realize you were making so much. I wouldn't have suggested divorce if I had known. It's not that you didn't know, you just weren't interested. After I switched jobs, you never asked about my work or my salary. You should have brought it up yourself. You never discussed your income either, even when we worked together. You barely communicated. Once you went independent and had little to no income, yet continued to spend recklessly, I figured it was pointless to bring it up. Let's start over. Come back. I refuse. I've finally achieved my freedom. Then what about the payments? $5,000 a month is unmanageable. Sell the house and use your income to pay off the remaining debt. You might be able to handle it if you adjust the repayment plan. Why not continue with the payments? I have no involvement with you anymore. I'm not interested in a stranger's debts. You're incredibly cold. Don't you have any empathy? I may seem cold, but I've been making substantial payments for over 6 years. Part of it was out of love for you, and part of it was because I felt obligated to your parents. If you wanted to come back, it might have been different. But you chose the divorce on your own. Technically, I have the right to sell the house, divide the assets, and even claim alimony for adultery. But I wanted to sever ties with you before dealing with that. I'm done with someone who turns their own money into a facade of wealth and squanders everything. I'm exhausted from covering your reckless debts. My life is my own now. Don't involve me in it any further." With that, I ended the call. Mike ceased to interfere in my life after that. The relief I felt when everything was finally settled was immense. Later, I learned that Mike had to give up his job and the house and create a new repayment plan for the loans. Returning to his previous job under the scrutiny of others must have been uncomfortable. Despite this, he would continue to be burdened by loan payments. I'd also heard that his parents decided to sell their house and move to a retirement home. It saddened me to think they wouldn't have faced such a choice if we hadn't divorced. I assisted with their move and contributed financially to their entry fees as a way to repay the kindness they had shown me. I hope they can now enjoy a peaceful life without the strain of $5,000 monthly payments. I can live comfortably by being naturally frugal, and my savings have steadily increased. I'm also looking into investing to secure my financial future. Currently, I'm moving forward with a new partner I met after my divorce, and I'm enjoying fulfilling days both professionally and personally. An old man with dementia is nothing but a burden, I thought. The idea of spending my remaining years caring for someone in such a state was unbearable. I longed for a fresh start in a new home with a new partner. My mother-in-law, clearly determined to leave her husband behind, was ready to start anew despite his condition and the $3.3 million debt he carried. "I can't continue as his wife any longer," she declared. "You, on the other hand, seem to get along with him. Take care of his debt and look after him, will you?" With that, she left the house she had shared with him for many years, leaving me with a mixture of shock and loneliness. Seeing her leave so cheerfully was jarring. I approached my father-in-law, who stood quietly at the entrance. "Thank you, Tom, for always treating me with kindness," I said. "I appreciate that you consider me like your real daughter. As your daughter-in-law, I'll do everything I can. Let's work through this together." Despite my words, I was filled with uncertainty about how to support him and alleviate his suffering. Yet, I felt a strong resolve to encourage him and envision a brighter future. When I noticed his shoulders trembling, I leaned in, thinking he was crying. To my surprise, he was chuckling. "I've been waiting for her to leave for a long time," he said, catching me off guard. He began to share stories from the past and his plans for the future. "I'm Naomi, 42 years old, and I lead a vibrant life with my wonderful husband, Harry, and his loving parents. Originally from a small town in Chicago, I moved to New York for university and then dove into the IT industry. It was there that I met Harry, my calm and serious boss. As we grew closer, we began to envision a future together. We decided to marry, and I chose to live with Harry's warm family. Although I was initially nervous about living with his family, having been raised by just my mother, the challenges of dealing with my fertility issues made me yearn for a lively family life. My father-in-law, Tom, was the president of the company I used to work for. Harry, his son, had started from the bottom and was steadily climbing the ranks. It wasn't until we decided to marry that I realized Harry was the son of the company's top executive. After our wedding, I left my job, but Harry continued to rise through the ranks. He started questioning Tom's business policies and had ambitions to grow the company himself. As Tom aged, rumors spread that he might retire, and Harry seemed to be waiting for that moment. Despite his age, Tom remained energetic and eager to try new things. He recently expressed a desire to create a space in his home for the local community to relax, chat, enjoy tea, and share homemade meals. However, my mother-in-law was completely against this idea. Even though she was only 5 years younger than Tom and meticulously maintained her appearance, she wasn't great at housework. Their meals were mostly takeout, and they often hired professionals for cleaning. Their affluent lifestyle was supported by Tom's stable job, but with his impending retirement, their income would decrease. The prospect of having strangers in their home for the community space stressed my mother-in-law. Despite Tom's respect for her wishes, he couldn't give up on his dream. Consequently, the renovation project was postponed. In the end, Tom decided to step down due to health concerns. Harry was chosen as the next president, but instead of taking over all at once, he would gradually learn the ropes until he was ready for full responsibility. My mother-in-law had become increasingly distant from my father-in-law. Even when he appeared tired and worn out, she ignored him and offered no support. The tension in their home grew palpable as she struggled to support his dream, and their interactions became strained. When Harry first began taking over the business, he and his father maintained a close and communicative relationship. However, as Harry gained confidence in his role, his demeanor at home began to change. He started treating his father with the same coldness that his mother displayed. Tom began to voice concerns about Harry's behavior at the company. Despite Harry's enthusiasm for his work, Tom worried that his son's attitude towards his colleagues and the work environment was problematic. Tom once confided in me that he feared Harry might be too harsh with his subordinates. Having experienced my own parents' divorce and a limited relationship with my biological father, Tom holds a special place in my heart. He's always been warm yet self-disciplined, and I deeply respect him as if he were my own father. He also cares for me and has started to share his thoughts and feelings with me, which has made it all the more painful to witness the growing distance between him, my mother-in-law, and Harry. Both were stubborn and resistant to any attempts I made to encourage openness. Then, one day, my mother-in-law suggested a family meeting. She proposed selling their current house and building a new one. I was intrigued by how the family would respond. "There's an old house for sale next door," she said. "It's a bit dated, but with some care and attention, it could become a beautiful home. We could even create a lovely space in the garden for everyone to enjoy." Her enthusiasm was a refreshing change from her usual reluctance. Tom's eyes lit up at the idea. "That sounds wonderful. We could definitely make a space in the garden for everyone to enjoy." Harry smiled and said, "If it makes you happy, I'm all for it." And so, plans for the new house began, with my mother-in-law taking the lead on the project. When I inquired about the progress of the new house, my mother-in-law confidently told me to leave it to her and not to interfere. She seemed to be communicating frequently with Harry, and I assumed things were going smoothly. However, I was stunned when I received shocking news. My father-in-law had accumulated a debt of $3.3 million. Despite his reputation as a seasoned business figure with substantial investment experience, his calm demeanor had concealed the scale of his financial troubles. My mother-in-law's first reaction was to worry about the future of the new house. Although my father-in-law tried to reassure her, saying, "Don't worry, everything will be all right. I'll sort it out," her anxiety was palpable. She began treating him even more coldly than before. One day, while I was washing dishes in the kitchen, I overheard a hushed conversation between Harry and my mother-in-law. They were discussing the ownership of the new house, and I was shocked to learn that despite my father-in-law providing the funds, they were planning to proceed with the house under Harry's name without informing Tom. I couldn't believe they were making such a significant decision without involving him. "Aren't you both making decisions about such an important matter without including everyone? Shouldn't the whole family discuss this together?" My mother-in-law's response was sharp. "You know, Tom is showing his age, and there's also the debt issue. Besides, you've only recently joined this family. It's best if you just observe and stay quiet for now. The only person I truly rely on is Harry." Her blunt words stung, and Harry didn't offer much of a response. He had been so absorbed in his work lately that our time together as a couple had diminished. The only person I genuinely trusted and could confide in was my father-in-law. Yet recently he seemed different. Where he once was lively and busy, he now spent more time sitting on the couch, lost in thought. I suspected that my father-in-law might be troubled by his debts, but it seemed like there was something more going on. "Have we had dinner yet?" he suddenly asked as I was finishing up the dishes. "We just had hamburgers, salad, and soup together," I replied after a moment of thought. "Right, sorry about that," he said and retreated to his room. His forgetfulness was unusual, and it made me uneasy. I suggested that he see a doctor, but he dismissed it with a laugh, attributing it to fatigue. When I spoke with my mother-in-law, she remarked, "Tom's charm was his intelligence and his money. Without those, he's nothing." I also discussed it with Harry, but he seemed preoccupied with work. He mentioned that things felt off and that there was a need for timely leadership at the company. Amidst all this, I felt a deep sense of loneliness, as if no one in the family was genuinely concerned. I repeatedly urged my father-in-law to see a doctor, but he consistently refused. His condition seemed to worsen, and I took it upon myself to research dementia, trying various approaches and continuously persuading him to get help. "You must be having a hard time," my mother-in-law said with a sigh and a cold smile. "Tom isn't the man he used to be. Once Harry takes over the company, everything will be his. Isn't it only natural that Tom should have nothing left?" Her eyes were colder than I had ever seen, a look I had never encountered before. Her harsh words and the growing tension in the house left me feeling both surprised and anxious. With the atmosphere growing more strained, I hoped that moving to a new house would help refresh our spirits. Finally, the moving day arrived. We hired professionals to handle the large furniture while we took care of the smaller items. My mother-in-law provided specific instructions such as where to place each item, and we followed them carefully. The last items to be moved were the cherished belongings of my father-in-law and me. I returned to our old place to fetch my father-in-law when my mother-in-law appeared unexpectedly. "Thank you, everything is sorted now," she said. "Actually, I've arranged another moving destination for you as well." Her shocking revelation left me speechless. I stammered, "What do you mean?" She handed me a note with the address of a nearby flat. Seeing her smiling face, I was at a loss for words. She cheerfully explained, "The new house will be for me, Harry, and Ted to enjoy. So you and Tom should start fresh in your new place." I couldn't grasp what was happening. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't leave my father-in-law alone. As I prepared to leave, she added, "Well, Tom needs you now. Do your best for him. We can think about what comes next when the time is right." My mind was spinning with shock and confusion. Who was this Ted she mentioned? I could hardly think straight. "How can you abandon Tom after all the years of support he's given to the family?" I asked, my voice trembling. She laughed, absent-mindedly playing with her hair. "I want to enjoy my life too. I've taken care of Tom's needs, but daily life with him has become tedious. I want a fresh start with Ted." I couldn't believe her words. It seemed my mother-in-law was set on leaving her long supportive husband to pursue a new life with someone else. Tears welled up in my eyes. "So all your plans for a new life come at our expense?" With a glint in her eye, she replied, "Grow up a little. We all have the right to seek new beginnings. Besides, if people knew about Tom's $3.3 million debt, they'd reconsider too." For a moment, I was utterly speechless, struggling to process the gravity of her decision. I was stunned by my mother-in-law's audacity. Despite my shock and confusion, I knew I had to stay calm and handle the situation for my own sake. "You're saddled with a $3.3 million debt, and continuing this marriage is unfeasible," she said dismissively. "My husband seems to have a fondness for you, so you can manage the debt and take care of him." With that, she offloaded her responsibilities onto me and left the house without a second thought about the dire situation her husband was in. Watching her leave with such confidence, I was overwhelmed by a mix of shock and loneliness. After she departed, I approached my father-in-law, who stood dejectedly at the entrance. "Tom, thank you for always being so kind to me," I said softly. "I'm honored that you see me as your own daughter. I promise to do everything I can as your daughter-in-law. We'll face this together." Although I tried to comfort him, I was engulfed by anxiety, unsure how to support him and ease his suffering. Yet a deep desire to help the man I respected and to envision a brighter future for him filled my heart. As his shoulders began to tremble, I leaned in, worried that he might be crying. To my surprise, he was laughing uncontrollably. "I've been waiting for her to leave for a long time," he said, his laughter still echoing. His unexpected reaction left me stunned. He continued, "When she talked about wanting a new house, I saw it as an opportunity. She's so dependent on me that I hoped she'd ask for a divorce. I didn't expect to be kicked out of the house, though." I was dumbfounded by his revelation. His elaborate act had completely fooled me. Seeing the confusion on my face, Tom smiled gently. "Naomi, I'm sorry things turned out this way, but don't worry about the investment. Even if it goes wrong, we won't lose much. Now the real adventure begins." When we arrived at the new house, my mother-in-law was visibly upset. "Naomi, why did you bring Tom here? You two were supposed to move into a flat. Plus, my new boyfriend is coming tomorrow. Harry's taking over the business, so I need Tom's bank statements," she demanded, flustered. Tom, seemingly unaffected by her dismay, turned to her with a steely gaze. "I know you plan to enjoy your time with your new lover," he said, shifting the atmosphere dramatically. My mother-in-law was taken aback, and Harry stood silent, watching the confrontation unfold. "I've already transferred the ownership of this house to my name," my father-in-law said with a hint of apology. "It'll be difficult for you to stay here now." His words left my mother-in-law speechless, her eyes widening in disbelief. "But don't worry, I've found a flat nearby for you. Enjoy your new life with your boyfriend. I'll cover the rent for the first few months," he added, his smile cold. Until that day, my father-in-law had always dealt with my mother-in-law's selfishness with patience and a smile. But now his eyes were sharp with anger, and his stern demeanor seemed to make her shrink. "I'm truly sorry," she said, her voice trembling as she fought back tears. "I was scared when I thought you had dementia, and when I heard about the $3.3 million debt, I was overwhelmed with anxiety. But I've always loved you. I never imagined it would end like this." Her words were filled with regret and desperation, but it was too late for apologies. My father-in-law chuckled bitterly. "The $3.3 million debt isn't as daunting as it seems. I married you for your vibrant spirit, not for your money. It's clear now that love isn't in your heart. I want to spend my remaining years in peace, and I don't want you here anymore. Please leave." Without even looking at her, he asked her to leave. Harry, stunned, gathered my mother-in-law's belongings and placed them by the door. He didn't want to abandon her but seemed to be trying to make amends with his father, perhaps to protect his own interests. "What are you saying, Harry? Are you leaving me behind? Help me, forgive me just one more time," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Ignoring her cries, my father-in-law and Harry walked into their new home. Her heartbreaking screams echoed in the tense atmosphere, but I followed them inside. Later, Harry made desperate attempts to reconcile with his father, but his work attitudes and interpersonal issues proved problematic. The company had another promising successor who had been performing well, and responsibilities were gradually being handed over to him. Consequently, my father-in-law entrusted the company to this new successor and stepped down as president. Harry, who had assumed he would naturally take over, was deeply shocked. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law began her new life in a small flat with her affair partner Ted. However, her new life didn't bring the happiness she had hoped for. Eventually, their relationship soured, leaving her alone once again. Concerned for her, I occasionally checked in on her. Her current state, far from her once glamorous days, was lonely and hard to witness. In contrast, my father-in-law and I began building a community space in our area. He provided the financial support, while I worked diligently to create a welcoming environment. The space became a local sensation, featured in magazines and online, and attracted many visitors. Riding this wave, we established an organization and expanded our activities. Harry, having left his previous job, now participates in our efforts. He used to be quite prideful, but through interactions with diverse people, I hope he becomes kinder and more compassionate. Together, we aim to fulfill Tom's dream and strengthen our community bonds, looking forward to many joyful days ahead.